It's a Monday morning and welcome to your favorite conversation in the capital and beyond. This is the AM show. My name is Pakwesi Shandoff. We're going to start off with a news review, and our guest for that discourse is lawyer Bobby Banson. He'll be helping us to go through all the relevant stories on the train of public discourse. Now, the race to lead the governing New Patriotic Party is getting keen by the days. So far, two contenders, that is the former Trades Minister Alan Tremantin and former Greek Minister Owusu Efriye Akoto, have resigned from their respective ministerial positions to concentrate on the contest ahead. Now, how will all of this work out for a party that is seeking to break the eight? This morning, our guest is the former scribe of the Patriotic Party, Nana Ohene Into. He'll be helping us to delve into that particular matter. Now, Ghana is considered a relatively peaceful country owing to part of the sustenance of the rule of law. Now, in 2021, Ghana ranked second in sub-Saharan Africa on the Global Peace Index. But despite these achievements, there are still considerable levels of violent conflicts in targeted communities, especially in the northern part of the country, prompting a strategic and contextual approach to preventing violent extremism. We've got these on our table as well. And for this particular discourse, Sheikh Amiyao Shaibu, a member of the governing board of the National Peace Council and spokesperson of the Chief Imam, would be joining us. Alisa Mogri, the programs manager for the Youth and Peacebuilding Catholic Relief Services, would also be sharing her opinions when we get to that part of the conversation. Stefan Hulis, who is the regional security coordinator for the West African Netherlands Embassy in Ghana, will also be joining us for that one. Also, we'll bring you yet again another installment of the Drive Safe campaign. And then later in the course of the show, we'll give you the opportunity to join in with your thoughts as we discuss all the relevant issues itemized so far. We're taking a breather. When we come back, we have the news. Now time for the news. My name is Pakwesi Shandoff. Majority Leader Osei Chairman Sambonsu says that he's working to get a response from President Kufuor on grievances by a group of individual bondholders asking to be exempted from the controversial debt restructuring deal. The debt exchange program is to make the nation's debt sustainable as a key condition in securing an IMF deal, but the bondholders say they do not agree to the outlined terms. Well, the majority leader says that he will engage the president about their grievances.
They raise very sensitive matters relating to lives and livelihood in the country. Indeed, and I agree that many of the elderly in society who've invested in these bonds are using them for survival. You know, buying medications, some of them using the earnings to take care of their kids, the school fees and so on that they are paying. So if all of a sudden these things come to an abrupt end, it's going to be very negatively impactful on the future of this country. So I agree that we need to have things through. I believe certainly this would not have been brought on board if there had not been any critical thinking. But beyond that, because a government is put in place to ensure that the burden on the people is lessened, there are real problems. And maybe we need to have better engagement to see the better way forward.
Does this engagement include exempting the individual bondholders, at least for now?
I don't want to make any commitment to that on behalf of government, because honestly, you should ferry the concerns to government, to the president, to the finance minister. And then we can sit down and do further consultations amongst ourselves, then also stepping out. If we have to further add value to the decision that's been taken, certainly I believe government will not be found wanting.
Meanwhile, financial literacy analyst Richmond Kwame Frimpong says that very little can be done per the situation.
It's looking like if what we've heard and read is anything to go by, then it's very likely the individual bondholders would not bring it up to the percentage the government is looking for. And when it falls short, as in the people who have agreed, when it falls short of the expectation in terms of the percentage, the government may probably have to reconsider which other component to use for this exchange. And time is actually running on the government, and probably it's time to look outside of the composition of the whole exchange program and see what else can be done to salvage the situation and to get the management and the board approval for the IMF program.
Staying on this development, General Overseer of the Royal House Chapel International, Sam Kranchiankra, last Friday charged God to push away leaders of the country from the servants of the poor. He was praying at the church's annual week of the Altar program.
If they lose their livelihood, who will they turn to? And where do they go? Jesus. Our God and our Father, we bring the president of this country, his vice and the minister of finance and economic planning, and all those who sit and take decisions. Father, bring them on their knees. Yes. And humble them. Yes. Humble them. If they will not hear any voice, let them hear the voice of Jehovah God Almighty. Amen. And warn them, oh God, that when you are in power and in authority, you don't touch the savings of the poor. Because when the poor people decide to cry, there will be judgment from heaven. Lord, push them away from the savings of the poor. Push them away from the savings of the needy. For there are families who depend upon these savings. I send you, holy angels, go and arrest the heart of the president, his vice, and the finance ministers and their advisors. Make them sensitive to the needs of the people. Bring them on their knees. Let them hear the voice of righteousness. Amen. And the poor and the vulnerable. Keep us, bring us help, oh God. Help our nation from collapsing. Help our nation from sinking. Jesus. Bring our finances back to life. Let the economy work again. Amen. Let families feed their children and their houses. Yes, Lord. Sustain breadwinners. Keep fathers and mothers.
Now, some 15 people are serving 3 months jail terms each for committing various sanitation offences. This is according to the Director of Public Health at the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, Florence Kuchi. She says that the offenders are part of a total of 477 people arrested and prosecuted during the AMA Joy Clean Ghana campaign in 2022. She spoke to my colleague Mamiesi Thompson on the Joy Newsroom.
The exact crime these people have committed, they have committed series of crimes. For instance, people accumulating refuse at their houses without properly disposing of them. Some of them food safety issues, others insanitary drains, others practicing open defecation, some too littering within the city center, and many others. They have flooded a lot of sanitation and environmental health offenses that are contrary to the Public Health Act 851 and the AMA Sanitation 2017 bylaws.
With these convictions, I mean, what are the outcome of the convictions? Were they in jail or they were given fines?
In fact, out of this, 21 of them were given a 3-month term jail or to pay a fine of 1,200. So those who were able to pay, some have been paid and they are out of the jail. So now we have about 15 people still in jail.
Mrs. Kuchi also says that this year's Clean Ghana campaign will involve more of community sensitization than prosecution.
In fact, this year, the exercise is starting in, let me say, the last week of January, and we are changing the exercise pace. Maybe we are not going to do the arrest we saw. We may be doing a lot of, let me say, community engagement. You may see us in the community with a meeting with our clients, educating them more, asking them what they think their sanitation issues are in their areas and what they themselves think they can do to help us solve those sanitation problems, so that going forward, we are all going to live in a sanitized and a healthy environment.
Away from sanitation, the Ghana Education Service says that the 2023 school placement exercise will begin with the verification of students' school choices. This was contained in a statement earlier issued by the service. There's more in the following report.
According to the release, management of the Ghana Education Service wishes to inform students, staff, parents or guardians, and stakeholders that this year's school placement exercise begins with the verification of students' school choices. This verification process is to ensure accuracy in students' choice information before they are placed in their selected second cycle schools. Students, parents or guardians will receive SMS message from the computerized school selection and placement system, which contains a web portal address and a USSD shortcode number *899 *88# with 4-digit token number. The verification exercise commenced Saturday, January 14, 2023 and ends January 22, 2023. Students who may have errors in their initial selection should call 055 654 1525. I take that again, 055 654 1525, or click on the edit button available on the web portal after their selection details displayed with copy of the original selection form. Students can also send an email with a copy of the original selection form to csSPS2021@gmail.com. Quote, unquote.
Now, a civil society organization, Child Online Africa, says that social media users should desist from further circulation of the video footage or images of the dismissed 8 Chiana SHS girls, though President Kufuor has directed the Ghana Education Service to reverse the decision. The footage of the girls insulting the president is still in circulation, but Child Online Africa warns that the situation could create a negative digital footprint for the girls and later jeopardize their future. Awo Adam Amenya is the executive director for Child Online Africa.
Taking down the video is one of the many ways that the video could be saved from circulation. But the fact is that there are a number of people who have saved it on their individual devices, and in their case to talk about this issue might be circulating it. So that's fine. It's okay to also report to content or platform owners. But how many of us are willing to do that coolly? It's not something that most of us are interested in, and some people are even calling for punishment of these children, which I am not against. We agree they should be punished or they should be disciplined, but the discipline should lead to reformation, and it shouldn't be a discipline that would affect their best interest, which is their right to education. So that is one of the things we are saying. And again, it brings to the fore our level of understanding of what constitutes digital footprint. And if we know that, then parents should also be mindful at what the children are doing online. And these young people, if they were talked to at home, I'm sure they wouldn't have let out such content. So digital literacy for all stakeholders, across board is very, very necessary. Again, this is what makes it easy for fraudsters to go out there and do things and think that they cannot be tracked. So this should serve as a learning situation for all of us who are engaging in digital space in one way or the other, to be mindful of what to do. And as a society, it's important for us to also approach this in a communal way. And the communal approach is what we are offering by saying that people should desist from sharing or circulating these videos the more. And I feel that when that is done, we will do these young people a lot of good than just looking at or reconsidering the punishment being given. Because clearly, if that is not done, it's even worse than sacking them or dismissing them from school and all that.
Now, former President John Mahama has eulogized the late Cardinal and Bishop of the White Houses, Cardinal Richard Attah, for his immense contribution to the underprivileged in society. He recalls with nostalgia the daily feeding of the mentally challenged persons in society and urged congregants to take a cue from the late Cardinal and glorify him. Mr. Mahama spoke when he joined congregants at a mass service at the St. Andrew Cathedral in Wa to commiserate with the church over the loss of the Cardinal. Rafiq Salam reports from Wa.
The funeral service of Cardinal Richard Attah was held at the World Sports Stadium and heavily attended by mass of notable personalities, including President Kufuor, top government ministers, bishops from the various dioceses in the country and beyond the source of the country, political elites, paramount and divisional chiefs from the country. Conspicuously missing was former President John Mahama, who was not in the country. He therefore sent a strong delegation of NDC party stalwarts to condole and commiserate with the Catholic Church over the loss in his absence. However, upon arrival in the country and heading to his home at Bole, where his political umbilical cord was cut en route to Wa, he joined congregants of the Sunday Mass at the St. Andrew's Cathedral, presided over by the administrator of the cathedral, Reverend Father Matthew Turosong.
Of the land.
John Mahama described the late Cardinal Attah as a good man who has met several times and blessed by him. He stated that Cardinal Richard Attah dedicated his entire life to serving the underprivileged, particularly mentally challenged persons.
And to testify for his life, he was a good man, very good man. And I always say that what is our purpose as Christians? Our purpose as Christians, they call us Christians because we follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. And our work is cut out for us because if we follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, then we must act Christ-like. And the whole basis of Christianity is to love thy brother as thyself and to do good to especially those who are poor and vulnerable. And we all heard the good things that our brother Cardinal Richard did. He used to feed mentally retarded people, send them food every day to feed them because they could not get food for themselves. And he was generous and good to everybody. And so we were all very happy when we heard that the Pope had elevated him as a cardinal. We were proud of him. Unfortunately, God gives and God takes. And he was taken ill when he arrived in Rome. And unfortunately, he passed. But we thank God that he was recognized and elevated in his lifetime. And so we say that God grants him peaceful repose and that we must all take a cue from the life that he left in order that we glorify him. If we follow in his footsteps, then we glorify him even in death.
Cardinal Richard Attah is the fourth bishop of the Wa Catholic Diocese in its 94-year history. He took over from Bishop Emeritus Dr. Paul Bernice, who is on retirement, and shepherded the Wa Diocese for close to 7 years. He became the first sitting bishop of the World Catholic Diocese to be buried inside the St. Andrew's Cathedral. Former President John Mahama, after his snappy speech, was led to the tomb of the late Cardinal by the World Catholic Diocesan Administrator, Very Reverend Edward Tengan, who now acts in absence of the bishop. He then laid a wreath at the tomb before heading out of the church. Reporting for JoyNews, Rafik Salam. Wow.
There's a wrap on the news this morning. For more, log on to www.myjoyonline.com. My name is Bernice Shandoff. The show continues. Stay. Welcome back on the AM show. It does feel good to be back. Let's now delve into the papers, and we're joined by Bobby Banson, a lawyer. He'll be joining us shortly as we get into the newspapers. But a lot to talk about this morning. We have quite a stack of papers, unlike we saw during the Christmas period. Now the papers are back in full swing. We'll be delving into them, and don't you forget, this morning we'll host former General Secretary of the MPP, Nanoy Hininto, who also speaks. He is in the Alan Chemating camp. The other day, you must have heard Alan Chemating talk about GTP and NATO and all of that. What does he mean? What is his agenda for Ghana? And can he execute? Can his team break the 8 should they get the nod? We'll be delving into all of those matters. But let's start with the newspapers this morning. The Daily Graphic: who wins MPP Flagbearership? 9 stalwarts eye slot. That story is there. President in Abu Dhabi for Energy Summit, and GRA exceeds revenue target by 3.6 billion Ghana cedis. There's also scrap levies on fuel to reduce prices further. And of course, that is something that most of us look forward to. Fuel prices are still expensive. We're grateful that they've taken a bit of a tumble, but if you look at previous prices compared to the current ones, we still could do a whole lot more. But let's start with that big story, the banner headline in the Daily Graphic newspaper. Who wins MPP Flagbearership? What do you think? If you're on our live stream, share your thoughts with us. With about 2 years to the December 2024 general election, 9 stalwarts of the New Patriotic Party are eyeing the flagbearership of the party. Already, 2 of them have resigned from their cabinet positions to prepare and win the hearts and minds of party delegates. I'm sure you know them. They are the Minister of Trade and Industry, Alan Kwadwo Kyerematen, and the Minister of Food and Agriculture, Dr. Owusu Afriyie Akoto. The 7 other contenders, all leading members of the MPP, are the Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, a former Minister of Energy, Boakye Ejako, the Member of Parliament for Asin Central, Kennedy Ohene-Agyapong, and a former presidential spokesperson and General Secretary of the party, Kwabena Ejapon. The rest are former Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Joe Gate, who is also the Member of Parliament for Isikado Ketang, a former MP for Mampong, Francis Adainimo, and a former Minister of State, Dr. Kofi Knedu Apreku, who is also a former Member of Parliament for Ofinso North. The MPP is, however, yet to open nominations, but these are the gentlemen that we've seen showing some signs, some semblance of wanting to take on the party, lead the party to break the 8 as they have purported over time. It is interesting because the last time my colleague Bernice Lansah had an interaction with Dr. Nyaho Tamaklo, a founder of the party, he took some pot shots at Kennedy Ejapong, talking about when he had come into the party and how much he had done. But in recent times, Kennedy Ohene-Agyapong, the Member of Parliament for Asin Central, also went back talking about even sometime in the 90s, early 90s, and a loan that he had to take and for the party, on behalf of the party, which it had taken him about 8 years to pay, and other things. Well, in the end, it's the party, the delegates. And that is why Sir John said, fear delegates. The way it is now, take your mind back to the early 2000s when some of these congresses or conferences were held and how people were shocked, if you remember at the time, Aliyu Mahama, then vice president, and what happened to him. You would know that
delegates can't be relied on. It happened again, similar incident when Job Wedu lost the seat to JFK, Justin Frimpong Kodua, as the General Secretary or scribe of the MPP. So how will it pan out when it comes to these elections? Who will carry the day? The other dimension to it has to do with, and some party people are not in agreement with this, former President John Kufuor says, look, this suggestion about let's pair Alak Chemating and Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia together and leave the rest is not in the right direction. Why? He says, let democracy have its way. In other words, let them go. Whoever wins, wins. And those are the democratic tenets that the party must observe. But after that, will they weigh that option? Consider, for example, if, and this is just being hypothetical, I don't lean anywhere, if Alan Chemating becomes the flag bearer, for example, would the current vice president, if he came in second, for example, would he want to take the vice presidential slot? Would Alan even be willing to do that? Would he be able to work with the vice president? They are in the same party, but these are questions that crop up. Let's reverse it. Should the vice president get the slot for his party? Would Alan be willing, after his trajectory of contending for the ultimate spot in the party, would he now be willing to take a second place or vice presidential slot to the vice president? All of those dynamics play. And who knows? We're even talking about these two gentlemen, but who knows? All the others that we've listed here could pull a surprise, could pull a rabbit out of the hat. Then what happens? And how will this play out for the MPP in terms of breaking the 8? All of these are questions, in some ways convoluted, that we can ponder, but we'll wait for when this happens and we'll see how things go. So those are some of the bits there, just to give you a bit of an idea. According to Article 13(1) of the MPP Constitution, the election for the party's presidential candidates shall be held not later than 24 months from the date of the national elections. The date and venue for the election shall be decided by the National Council, provided, however, that the National Council may, on appropriate occasions, vary the day. And just to serve as a bit of a reminder as well, Mr. Chemating served under former President Kufuor between 2003 and 2007, before his reappointment by President Kufuor in 2017 till his resignation early this year. This will also be the fourth time Mr. Chemating is contesting the MPP Flagbearership. The first was in 2007, the second in 2010, and the third in 2014. 2007, 2010, 2014. And now, very likely, at least from what we've seen so far, and his resignation and everything else, 2023, if you like, 2023, thereabouts. So we'll see how that pans out. Let's also take a look at the president's being in Dubai, in fact, in Abu Dhabi for that energy summit. There's been a lot of talk about that. So let's get to it. President Kufuor is leading a delegation from Ghana to attend the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week in the United Arab Emirates. The ADSW is a global initiative championed by the United Arab Emirates and its clean energy powerhouse, Masdar, to accelerate sustainable development and advance economic, social, and environmental progress. The president is accompanied by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Shelley Ayoko Botry, the Minister of Energy, Dr. Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, the Minister of Lands and Natural Resources, Samuel Abu-Janapo. We've heard him in the news recently. He also is now acting as Trades and Industry Minister. The Minister of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, Dr. Kufuor Friye, officials from the presidency, the Foreign Ministry, as well as energy agencies. Now, the ADSW, established in 2008, brings together heads of state, policymakers, industry leaders, investors, entrepreneurs, and youth, all of whom have a stake in the future of our planet. Why? To discuss and engage on bold climate and innovations that will ensure a more sustainable world for future generations. The 15th edition of the annual event will be held under the patronage of the UAE President, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who has championed sustainability as a key pillar of the UAE's economic and social progress and prosperity. Just speaking of the United Arab Emirates, though, brings to mind Saudi Arabia. Yes, they are out there for a lot of the wrong reasons. Women's rights and sometimes whitewashing. You remember that incident to do with golf and how they were trying to get some of the top players around the world to come there, fizzled out. Now they have the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo and Al-Nassr, all of that to give the country a certain good image. But I saw something recently that just made me think. A lot of their desert, just as Dubai has done in the United Arab Emirates, they also have this futuristic plan. Hundreds of billions of dollars to transform their country, portions of their country, into something else, something technologically advanced and all of that. And when I saw that, I again asked myself, we're so far behind some parts of the world, most of the world, in fact. The economic north is leagues, light years ahead of us. When are we going to catch up? What are we going to do? And as we continue to mark time, somewhere in Spain, they are producing about 100 tons of cocoa. Maybe not much, 80 tons thereabouts. The Chinese tried doing it. What does that point out to us? It means all of these countries are trying to wean themselves of their dependence on us when it comes to agricultural products. And yet we can't even get agriculture right. Interesting take sometimes. I just sometimes when I look at Ghana and think about us and think about our leaders and everything, I just wonder, because these leaders we have are Oxbridge students, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, all of those. The Agric Minister, for example, schooled at Cambridge. Agric economics, how is that told on our economy? These are all things we can digest. But let's look at the story as well. Very interesting one. It's by Kester Abroam Kranche, who says, scrap levies on fuel to reduce prices further. And I agree with him. Now, existing taxes and levies imposed on petroleum products need to be rationalized to beat down the prices of petroleum products at the pump, two energy experts have said. An associate lecturer at the University of Aberdeen in the United Kingdom, Dr. Theophilus Echampong, and the executive secretary of the Chamber of Petroleum Consumers, COPEC, Duncan Amwa, believe that while some of the levies have not been fully used for their intended purposes, others have outlived their purpose but continue to contribute to the price buildup on fuel sold to consumers. Dr. Champon said the price stabilization and recovery levy, for instance, had not been fully used for its intended purpose, although it continued to contribute to the price buildup on fuel, which is true. So when we're looking for those sums of money that we had put down to cushion us in instances when fuel prices shoot up, among others, the money had been expended elsewhere and we were left with empty hands, which is why, part of why, prices kept soaring to the point where it simply became unbearable. If you've forgotten, diesel hit 24 cedis, 23 cedis and 99 pesos. Petrol hit around 21 cedis. And those were some very tricky times. So we thank God that we're not in that league anymore. But even where we find ourselves currently, it's still quite a draw on our pockets. And a lot more must be done. And futuristically, we must think about some of these situations, what we use the ESLA and others for, so that we'll not be caught pants down with our hands in the cookie jar when things, we are caught up that proverbial creek without a paddle. We're joined by Bobby Benson, a lawyer and a man who freely speaks his mind. Bobby, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Good to have you, and our apologies for dragging you out of bed this early.
for God and country.
Great. So already I've taken a look at who wins the MPP Flagbearership. There are 9 stalwarts. We are looking at big wigs in the party. And of course, you cannot overlook those who have resigned. Alan Chamating, former Trades and Industry Minister. And this would be his second stint from the Kufuor era. And now, then, Agric Minister Dr. Efriye Akoto. They have resigned. We have the likes of the Vice President. We have Boakye Jarko, former Energy Minister, a number of members of Parliament in there. What do you make about the MPP? When you look at the MPP now and how things are going, I'm sure you heard Alan the last time. Efriye Akoto says he will also be speaking. What do you make of developments as far as the flag bearership of the party is concerned?
Well, I think that it was to be expected. The MPP, we all know that when there is an opportunity for the presidential elections or flag bearership race, they have a lot of their personal or big words vying for the position. And so it was to be expected. I just hope that unlike what happened in the 2007 race, we would have people not complaining too much about the procedure or the election, the campaigning process, and they will come out stronger than divided, because a strong MPP party is good for Ghana's democracy.
Let's also talk about scrapping levies on fuel to reduce prices further. An academic, together with the leader of the executive secretary of COPEC, Duncan Amwa, both of them are saying, look, the ESLA, for example, is not being used for its intended purposes. Let's do that, and let's also take off payments when they are not used for that. There are also other price build-ups. I don't know the last time you tried buying anything. The COVID-19 levy is still featuring in there. And some of us ask ourselves, why are we still being taxed for this? Are you in agreement with them? Because they keep increasing the prices of fuel. And I say, Bobby, that while prices have taken a tumble and we're grateful, like Oliver Twist, we want more. We can always do better. Your take?
Well, I particularly want to start with the COVID levy. It's interesting. I think that it's only in Ghana that we are still paying for the COVID levy. Obviously, then we ask yourself, if a tax is introduced for a particular purpose, and that purpose has been extinguished or is no longer relevant, is it lawful to continue to ask the people to pay those taxes? And so it's interesting to see, except that, we must also admit that we are in a country where the government itself says that there is no money to even pay bondholders and things like that. And so you cannot take away the fact that the government, whether legal or illegal, would want to exhaust any avenue possible to be able to raise funds. So if the civil societies, when they introduce some of these levies, a lot of the civil societies sometimes support because of the purpose. They are saying these funds are going for this purpose. But if the purposes are no longer relevant, or they are no longer, like we said, they've been exhausted, then it stands to reason why those should be scrapped. Because at the end of the day, the government is there to make the lives of the citizens comfortable by whatever legal means that they can. So if in the midst of all these economic hardships that the government itself has acknowledged, if there are means that they can reduce these hardships on the consumer or on the citizenry by removing these taxes that they introduce for specific purpose, I believe it's a call in the right direction.
What do you make, though? This just came to mind since we're talking about the flag bearers and all of that. So what happened with Alan Chemating, his resignation, and then we saw in a statement by the Jubilee House that Kufuor, the finance minister, was taking over. And then all of a sudden, a short while later, a few days later, we saw that it was Samuel Abu-Jinapor taking over without any correction, so to speak, of the statement from the presidency. With legal documents, of course, if something comes subsequently and it does not make any reference but states something else, I guess in some cases it is assumed that the second one takes precedence over the first. But legally speaking, what should be done in such instances? I'm just curious.
Well, the law allows the president to appoint people in caretaker positions. It will not be the first time that in such circumstances we've had the president appoint other persons to hold that fort until the president makes a substantive appointment that will now go through the constitutional procedures, appearing before Parliament, as it were, and getting your nomination approved. And so if the president, I want to think that the backlash to the appointment of Kufuor as the stand-up minister, in the light of all the struggles he himself has had as a finance minister, may be what may have influenced the president's decision to withdraw should I say his nomination or his appointment, for lack of a better word, as a stopgap measure. And so If in his own wisdom he thinks that Mr. Samuel Abu-Jinapor is better placed to discharge that responsibility in the short term, we would want to see for what interests me most is who he would nominate in the long term. I don't think that there's any legal question as to whether the president could now change who the stopgap minister would be. Like I said, it's not a substantive position that is required to go through the provisions of the 1992 Constitution, because I don't think that there would be any additional emoluments for playing that role or additional benefits for playing that role. I believe that it will only be administrative in the sense that the directors are there, as it were, to do the real work. And so we would want to see how soon the president will be prepared to nominate a substantive person for that position.
Well, let's see how long that would take. And we know that for the Agric Ministry, the Fisheries Minister has also been asked to stand in, Mavis Hawa Humsin. Let's look at the story. GRA exceeds revenue target by 3.6 billion Ghana cedis. That story is there. And on the back page, I don't know how much of football you follow, Bobby, but Black Galaxies lose 1-2 to Madagascar. If you look at the build-up to this match, well, I think was it Uganda or Angola they played the last match against? It did not end because the other team had scored one, and then we got a penalty, and then the other team walked off the pitch. So it was inconclusive. But they beat Al Ahly. They beat, I think, the Egyptian side. They beat other sides. It looked very good. But then they get to the tournament proper, and Morocco had exited because they wanted a direct flight to Algeria, and that did not happen. So each team started with 3 points, and now they've lost their first match, which means they have a mountain to climb in that second match. What do you have any expectations at all?
I watched the match, Ben.
Right.
And for the first half, it was really funny because our players kept slipping on the pitch. The one I watched, the commentators were laughing at us, saying that we did not have the proper boots to play on such surfaces. And I felt, it was an indictment on our football administrators that you go to the pitch before the match to train, and then you see that it's just been watered, and you still go with boots that will cause your players to fall, to slip. You notice that the 2 goals we conceded were all mistakes from the back. And so the first goal, the defender slipped and it allowed the opponent to win the ball. The second goal, it was a back pass that went bad, So maybe the technical handlers can say that, well, it was the bad pitch. But the administrators, it was the bad pitch. But the administrators should be made accountable. I am beginning to doubt if there is any, or there would be any hope from this. I spoke to some of the persons before the tournament, and Ghana was tipped as a country that would at least reach the finals. And with the performances I saw yesterday, especially in the first half, the second half, they improved a bit, to be frank. We would see what the second game would come out. It will not be the first time that a team has lost the first game and gone on to perform very well. Right. I think in Angola as well, 2010 or so, there was a similar situation where the Togolese national team withdrew from the tournament under very different circumstances. I believe we lost our first match, and then we went on
to the finals, I think.
Yes, and so that is my only prayer, that the technical handlers and the administrators will put their house in order so that this will not be another shambolic performance at a tournament. Ever since Mr. Ketokreku took over the affairs of the administration of Ghana football, we've not done well in major tournaments, and I want to think that this should be an exception. But if we do not, then we would always come back to the drawing table and start the blame game, and then we will see how far this will go.
Let's look at other stories quickly from the Ghanaian Times newspaper. President attends Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week initiative in the UAE. We've already taken a look at that. GRA bagged 75.5 billion in 2022, and that is cedis. Beats revenue target by 3.6 billion Ghana cedis. GES rescinds decision on punishment of 8 Chiana SHS students and 70,000 students to benefit from 2022-2023 loan scheme. Let's start with a bit about those 8 students, the Chiana students. We all saw the videos. They were in poor taste, bad taste. But legally speaking, yes, and some of them are over 18. I hear practically all of them. Do we indict people for insulting public figures? I think sometime last year, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, got a slap from somebody. Of course, that is assault. Then that became physical. But this whole bit about the president coming in to sort of say, oh, let's not punish them after civil society, after a lot of people, prominent people, after Child Rights International had stepped in. What is the stance? I've heard people go back to the early 2000s and other incidents of insulting where the law simply did not have anything to say against that. What does the law say, Bobby?
Well, I have read or followed that particular story, and there's no doubt that there's no law that makes insulting somebody who is a president or a public official an offense. I mean, you could have, our laws are such generic that unless you think that you have been defamed, it's not even an offense. It's a civil matter that you can take it on. Remember, the libel law has been repealed from our books. I do not think that they would have any basis to do that. But Ben, if
and this was as far back as, if I'm not mistaken, around 2001, right? The criminal libel law.
Well, yes, was repealed. But if we look at the larger picture, you see, we and this is where, for me, I always come back to whether it's the National Communications Authority or whatever that we have. These people we are calling students, or if we want to extend the discussion to the youth, which I believe you and I will not be accepted, what are we exposed to these days? Where you would have people in the name of journalism sit on media platforms and use words that we cannot repeat on platforms like yours in describing or criticizing public officials, some as high as the president. And the National Media Commission and the National Communications Authority, I'm mentioning the NCA because they are responsible for issuing the frequencies that these media houses operate upon or operate on, and they don't do anything. And these insults go viral. And so if you're a student or you're a youth and you don't have the benefit of a superior elderly wisdom, and you see somebody that is presented as a journalist or as a freedom fighter, for lack of a better word, sit on a public or a television and insult president or insult ministers, I do not believe that politics should give anybody the right to insult the elderly or people that have offered themselves for public office. You may not agree with their activities or what they are doing, but you would have a way of criticizing it without necessarily using those words that we hear these so-called freedom fighters or truth searchers or whatever they tend to describe themselves with or by use. And so if we do not go down the drain and then stem this tide from the source, this will not be the first time that we are having these things happening. And it will not be the last, unless the National Communications Authority and the National Media Commission or whatever regulators that are there would sit up to ensure that our media spaces are devoid of such vituperatives. Other than that, it will be an eyesore. We would have a generation that do not appreciate the fact that you can have an intellectual discourse disagreeing on national issues or the political side, the other side, without necessarily using insulting words. And so I believe that we should look at that picture, the bigger picture, to see how we can clamp down on these things that we see on our airwaves.
Right. Let's go on the international front very quickly. I'd like to look at these two stories. Protesters call on Tunisian president to resign, and thousands of Tunisians have demonstrated against President Kais Saied as the country faces a deepening political and economic crisis. A crowd gathered in the capital, Tunis, to demand the end of his government. Tunisians who supported Mr. Saied since he came to power in 2021 have grown increasingly frustrated. Why? Because of the state of the economy. The protests come 12 years to the day since former dictator Zine Abidine Ben Ali was forced into exile. And of course, that also has something to do with the Arab Spring and things that came up. The the Jade Revolution. It just brings all of this to mind. And in Congo, several people have been killed in a church bomb attack. At least 5 people have been killed and 15 others wounded in a bomb attack during a service at a Protestant church in the eastern DRC. An army spokesman said the attack during the Sunday service in the city of Kasindi on the border with Uganda was likely carried out by the Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF, a Ugandan army group that has pledged allegiance to ISIL or ISIS, an extended part of ISIS. Any quick takes on these international stories? I'm particularly interested in the one in Tunisia.
Well, it's I have been, or we have been expecting something like that to come up, particularly in those regions, because one, we know that I don't want to use the word temperament, but they once they think that the government is out of control in terms of, or the economy or the political situation is out of control, they express their displeasure by hitting the streets. And we all know how sometimes it ends. You would have extremists taking advantage, and then it ends up being violent on both sides. We all know the impact that if there are disturbances in that part of Africa, the impact that it has on those of us on the south or the sub-Saharan part of the continent. And so we hope that the government or the powers that be in Tunisia or even the region would be able to sit down and then have a resolution and a compromise to these things. And to the events in Congo, may the souls of those that perish find peace. And it's gradually, when you start hearing activities of terrorists on the continent, then as a country, as Ghana, we would have to also sit up and make sure that our borders are well protected. Because in the past, you hear issues of civil war on the continent, but if you start hearing activities of terrorists in Burkina Faso, in Sudan, in Somalia, now in Congo, then you want to believe that it's no longer things that are far away from us. They are getting closer to home every day. And so the security apparatus that be in our country must also sit up to make sure that we do not experience some of these unfortunate incidents anytime in our history.
When you look at the back page of the Ghanaian Times newspaper, Hearts dropped points against Samatex. It ended in a barren draw. But today, for example, Bibiani Gold Stars will be locking horns with Kotoko, as well as Accra Lions versus Brekum Chelsea. But the league log, Ediana on 24 points, Hearts on 21, Kotoko on 20, Bechem as well on 20, and Dreams FC on 19 points. Quite a number of teams on 19 points. Just about 4 of them and another one on 18 points. It is reminiscent of the English Premier League, where if you look at the point differences between the top teams, it's not much to distinguish, basically. But 2 quick stories from the Daily Guide newspaper. Names pop up in ministerial reshuffle, and the reshuffle that is expected is supposed to turn things around for the government as it takes giant steps to win the 2024 presidential elections after several calls for the president to juggle his ministers and probably bring others on board. Some deep-throat sources, according to the paper, suggest that Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, Minister of Energy, will either take over from Alan Kyerematen as the substantive Minister of Trade and Industry or be shifted to the Health Ministry to take over from Kweku Agyeman-Menu. There's also speculation that Kobina Tahir Hammond, popularly known as KT Hammond, Member of Parliament for Adansi Asokwa, who was initially tipped for that position at the inception of the Kufuor administration before Boache Ejako torpedoed him, might get the slot at the Energy Ministry. It goes on and on. There's also oil for gold land, and the first consignment of government's oil for gold deal arrived yesterday at the Tema port from Dubai. The Daily Guide has led. The preliminary consignment, which consists of 40 million metric tons of oil, is expected to be increased subsequently. Ghana currently has a monthly oil consumption requirement of 180 million metric tons of oil. So this would be just about 40, 80, so just less than a quarter of our needs, our requirements. But what I find interesting, so this is coming from the United Arab Emirates, we are told. Well, at least that's what we've been told. I am just saying, Is it really from the United Arab Emirates? I'm just putting this out there. Only time will tell. Any quick thoughts on that?
I've still not been able to wrap my mind around the reasoning behind the oil for gold. To be frank, maybe I have not read enough on the government position. I mean, gold, the value always increases. Every country, like we've been told, measure their wealth by the gold reserves that they have. And so you have countries, trying to buy as much gold as possible. At a point in Ghana, we had the Bank of Ghana saying that they are now buying the gold to show up our reserves because the value of gold, it's really high. And we have it, and we are exchanging it for oil, which, is consumed within a day. When you keep the gold over time, the value of the gold would go up. And so as a layman, I'm really yet to buy into that whole idea. And I hope that it becomes a good decision. I don't know how transparent the whole transaction has become, whether Parliament has been involved in terms of how much the value is going for, who is sending what, whether there are agents involved, whether the price at which it's being sold, who is buying it. Is it a state-to-state transaction, or there are middlemen who are, involved? All those questions, I have not seen them. Maybe the answers have been provided, but I have not seen them. And I hope that it is something that Parliament has looked into and has approved for the benefit of Ghanaians, so that it doesn't become another issue where later facts come out and evidence in support of same point to the fact that it wasn't well thought through and may have had some people benefiting at the blind side of the Ghanaian public.
Well, let's wrap with just a few stories. Mahama, Republic Press, Mahama attacks Alan Cash. He says it is aimless for these ministers to be stepping down on roles they were assigned to, not forgetting the part they played in driving the country into economic devastation. So he's been, taking a swipe at some of those who have resigned. Kwesindum cries for former employees. MPP floors NDC and Sefiri also election petition, and court remands 2 over 900,000 Ghana cedi robbery. The Ghanaian publisher MPP, others say no to inclusion of individual bondholders. It's interesting because people have said that, look, when push comes to shove and members of parliament are affected, then they'll come into some sort of agreement. And we have seen quite a number of them together with others also saying that, look, leave our individual bonds out of this. And finally, the custodian newspaper, Greater Accra NDC on fire as Tetechai and Ashimore clash. And this is on the back of the NDC's Greater Accra Regional Chairman, Ni Ashimore, and the Regional Secretary, Theophilus Taitete, who are said to be in acrimonious disagreement with the manner in which the business of the party should be conducted. Any quick take on Mahama's thoughts and maybe the individual bondholders, and we can say goodbye?
Well, obviously the campaigning or quasi-campaigning season has started. It was to be expected that once certain persons further confirmed by their actions or inactions their desire to be the flag bearers of the parties, then they will take aim at each other. But let's see. Sometimes when you hear the NDC communicators, it's as if they have a preferred candidate from the MPP. Sometimes when you hear the MPP communicators, it's as if they have a preferred candidate from the NDC. But at the end of the day, I believe it will be a very good contest. Ghana's democracy is growing, and I hope that this season, this new campaigning season for the highest seat of the land, would usher us into another level of maturity in our democratic dispensation. And definitely the candidate that would be able to sell his ideas and have some form of credibility, either in the past or in the present with Ghanaians, would carry the day.
Well, Bobby, thank you so much once more. We're grateful that you took the time to join us this morning, waking up this early, and we wish you the very best of the day.
Thank you very much, Ben, and I wish you the best of the week too.
Thank you. That is Bobby Banson, a lawyer who just joined us for our news review. But up next, we'll be telling you a lot about sports. And of course, it was glory, glory, Man United. Yes, we did it to the citizens of Manchester. So Manchester is red again, but it was a hard-fought victory there. And I love the way the league is playing out right now. Arsenal on some 47 points, City on 39. It's Newcastle, the Magpies, and Manchester United both on 38, but we have a game in hand over them. And when you look at the league log, 1.2 points, 1.2 points. I just love it when it gets that way because any little slip and you could lose your slot. So which teams will survive and which teams will be knocked out? Which teams will play in the European Champions League? Well, more of that as we bring you Sports Tuesday. Welcome back on the AM show. We start with our big stories, and indeed, it's a big one we're kickstarting matters with. The race to lead the governing New Patriotic Party is getting keener by the day. So far, two contenders, former Trades Minister Alan Kyerematen and former Agric Minister Akakpo, have resigned from their ministerial positions to concentrate on the contest ahead. How will all of this work out for a party seeking to break the eight? Our guest this morning is a former scribe of the New Patriotic Party. He joins us for a conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Ghana, I give you Nana Ohene Into. A very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us on the AM show.
I'm happy to be here too.
I don't even know where to start. There's so much to digest, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to spend some time talking about some general issues of concern, the party, the country, and from there, we'll have a focus for an extensive period on the candidacy of Alan Kyerematen.
And I thought that was the real
issue. Why? Oh, yes, most definitely. And that's why I'm saying we're going to have extensive conversations on that. And why you're in his camp.
Why?
Yes, I mean, we'll get into that. What is it about Alan Kyerematen that stands out for you? He's not the only one. Nine contenders so far from, we've not heard from the vice president officially yet, but everyone, the suggestion is that he will be there. We're looking at Efri Akoto. We are looking at the energy minister, Napo, Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, likely, Kennedy Japan. All of them are in there. Why him? Well, let's start off the conversation with some lighter matters. The bit about Meek Mill, did you follow that? The video?
Well, I didn't follow until my son brought it up, and I looked at it and I said, "Oh, I'm sure this must be Photoshop." That was my first word. He said, "Oh, Daddy, no." I said, "Are you sure? Let's look at it again." So he brought it and I looked at it, and I was quite surprised, and I was like, "How did he get there? And how did he get the permission?" And this is probably the highest security entity that you can think about. So those were the issues that, but frankly, I did not believe that it was real until my son said, "Daddy, look at it again. It is real, it's not Photoshop." So I think it didn't really sit well with me, and I was quite surprised. How did it come about? That was my real issue.
Do you think it was an oversight from some quarters? Some have pointed to the fact that, look, the handlers at the presidency, those who were in charge, heads should roll. Do you think so?
I think so. I think so because I view it more as a security thing.
A security breach?
Yes. Yes, because this is a place where I was saying, look, if it were the case that the president was doing some function and this young man had been asked to come and entertain the president and his guests, I mean, it would have been okay.
It would have been a different story.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the president can invite any group of artists or performers, and of course, in any of these official or even unofficial function, you can invite some group of artists, musicians, choirs and so on, and that would be good. But just out of the blue, and I'm wondering, is it for commercial purposes for the artists? And who would have given the permission?
So it was sort of improper. The prelude to a video that he put out, and then, like you saw, different scenes from the Jubilee House and all of that, and people felt very frustrated about that. Because come to think of it, our local artists have never had that kind of
course, they won't think
access.
They won't think about doing that because Flagstaff House is not for that purpose. It just doesn't even give us, as a nation, a good image. So I am not surprised that our local artists have never thought about it. They shouldn't. There are all manner of places. If you are lucky, if you are fortunate, and the president is doing something and he invites you to come and perform, and you get that background, that one, you are lucky. But to take it on a purely commercial, I don't know. I just, so...
Interestingly,
I don't want to spend too much time.
No, definitely not. Like I said, we'll discuss other issues, but extensively, about some 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to be talking about the Allen, campaign and what all of that means. But so we saw a Kenyan politician, Winnie Odinga, actually post. She's a member of parliament, from what I hear. This Meek Mill Ghanaian story is just, well, she says, nuts. Basically crazy. Shooting a music video at the president's office while rapping, and she uses words that we cannot use. On the presidential podium of the first African nation to gain independence is wild. And Nkrumah must be rolling in his grave, if I may add that. So that was how far this...
I'm not surprised the Kenyan MP is expressing this kind of sentiment. I'm not surprised.
Let's take a quick look at the MPP's leadership. We'll eventually get to, but when you look at the MPP's leadership, even as we contemplate the economy and all that, you would notice that definitely we have a new guard at post administratively, and same for the NDC. When you look at the pairings, so look at the likes of Esiedun Ketia as chairman, Fifi Kwete as general secretary. We have the vice chair people. We have Joseph Yamin organizing, among others. Then you look on the other side, the MPP, your party, and you have Ayensu Ntim, who is now chairperson of the party. You have JFK, Justin Frimpong Kodia, or Kodia Frimpong. I think it's Kodia Frimpong, but it's been switched just to fit. And you look at the new crop, John Mahama bowed out and all of that. Some have said that the other side, the NDC side, has an edge. Do you believe that?
In terms of the
in terms of the persons, in terms of their experience. Look at Esiedun Ketia and how long, donkey years, he's been general secretary. Fifi Kwete back then, propaganda secretary. And even in the 90s, what he was doing for the MPP, the NDC, I beg your pardon. And others will say, oh, JFK just came into the picture. But I heard something recently from JFK. He said, I am dangerous, particularly because they've not seen what I can do. So how do you assess, when you look at both sides, what do you see?
Well, first of all, let me, now that you brought it up, let me congratulate the new leadership of MPP, the national chairman, Mr. Stephen Ayesu Ntim, and then Justin Kodia, the general secretary, and the other executives. For the chairman in particular, you know, Stephen Ntim has always had his eyes on this role.
He's a long-time contender.
Oh, yeah. And he had even worked as the first vice.
Yes, at a point.
National chairman. You understand? So that would tell you that he has always been in the leadership of the party. After he lost his bid to be chairman for the first time in 2005, he never relented. He continued to push and contest and push until right now he won the last election. So I want to congratulate him. And you would see that this is a man who, apart from being at the national helm, even after he had lost the bid for national chairmanship, Mr. Ntim had continued to actively support the entire structure of the party. I mean, at some point, not many of us will have the resources to be able to provide a vehicle for every single regional secretariat across the country, providing stationery for almost every constituency office in the national, and in so many other areas. So I think he's a very experienced person, very committed to the cause of this party. And I have no doubt that he will do a good job. And again, he's a man who has a very calm demeanor. And if you look at him, you might
deceptive?
Just... Pardon?
Is that deceptive? Because others look at the very energetic posturing of Esiedun Ketia, how he wants to get into every nook and cranny, and put that side by side with him and say, oh, this is a no fight.
I would come to that. You see, this is a man who has built a very strong business base for himself. Very successful businessman. Now, if anybody can take a challenging area as business and be able to make so much of it personally and build himself in that respect, at the same time run also as a politician, obviously this person knows what he's about. This is a person who thinks very deeply, is very perceptive, and can get things done. So that's okay to talk about people who may be firebrand, if you like, but there are politicians in this country, they were never seen as firebrand. They got the chance to lead this country, and we saw the results. So
I mean, we can, even on that same trajectory, we can look at former President Kufuor. Serving and everything.
Even in
pretty quiet.
People felt, oh,
in fact, when I heard him come up at the time, I felt he was going to lose. I was looking at some of the names that popped up. But he did win.
So that one per se, you can't just say there's a person who's calm and therefore is a negative. It can never be a negative at all. Two, you're talking about Esiedun Ketia. Esiedun Ketia is all over the place, and he's been in the business for a long time. And
he's won elections, he has lost elections.
Yes, and I concede, and that is right. You're talking about his demeanor and personality, he's more like a firebrand type. Fifi Kwete is almost like that. I mean, seriously, if you know Fifi. So you put a firebrand chairman and a firebrand general secretary. So I'll pack that. That one you can do your analysis later on.
Okay.
We have had situations in the MPP where the chairman was very strong and assertive. The general secretary, very strong and assertive. And there were some issues.
Okay.
So when you have, if you like, a contrasting pair, like Stephen Tim and Kufuor, who's also a strong young person, professional, has been with the MPP students movement, the TESCON, all of his years. I mean, he knows he is coming as a young man, but having grown through the party youth system, he knows the party very well.
He may know the party structures, but that is, again, the vibrancy, that carry-along feel. I get the picture you're painting. Maybe a little pretty hard, a bit soft to get that counterbalance. But in this instance, what even the academics say is you have two softies in there. And again, when you look at, you mentioned Fifi Kwete and how vibrant he is. Isn't it a mismatch when you look at him going toe-to-toe with, on different issues with JFK?
It depends on what you're looking for. I think that we are having to go away from the politics of macho thinking to politics of issues, strategy, delivery. So I don't think that just being a certain kind of firebrand personality is it. And that is basically all you need, or that's mainly what you need. So you would have to look at these persons from a broader perspective of their personalities, their professional backgrounds, the things they've already done, and then their roles in the party over the years. So I don't think that just talking about a softie and a macho is enough. No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
When you look at where Ghana is currently, we're in the second term of President Kufuor, in his third year, actually. So there's just 1 year more to go. Well, if you're not counting 2023. What do you see? What do you make of the story, the Kufuor story? Recently, I was reading an article by one Yawan Sako, and to paraphrase, because I do not have here what he said, but he says, if we had not had a Kufuor, as president, we would have always said that he was the best president we never had. But in this instance, we have seen him in action, and it is nothing to write home about. I think
nothing to write home about.
Basically, let me just get the quote here. Yes, so here's what he said. Had Kufuor never become president, there would have been no doubt in minds like mine that he would have made a great president. But he became president, and now we are utterly baffled at what we see. And he goes on and on.
So
this is just a little... No. There are other parts I can quote for you. But how do you respond to this in terms of breaking the eight? Maybe even before you get there. How would you assess Kufuor as a president? We had John Kufuor from your party, red, white, blue, representing your party. Yes. Of course, from the NDC's end, we've had Rawlings, we've had Attah Mills, we've had Mahama. How well do you feel Kufuor has represented the MPP as leader of this country?
I think that when Kufuor took over, everybody would remember that the country was in serious economic difficulty. Incidentally, it's funny, but any time, especially from Kufuor's time and now, anytime the MPP is entering government in the Fourth Republic, the situation would be so bad, you are basically starting from a hole. This is what Kufuor came to meet, and Kufuor had to battle things out from a hole. Maybe some people would remember, others may not. Similarly, by the time Kufuor took over, we're basically in the same kind of situation. So you are working out of a hole to try and fill a hole, build a platform before you can even rebuild the foundation. Very difficult situation. So if you don't put it in that perspective and you jump to a certain conclusion, you will be making a very serious mistake. Now, when Kufuor was campaigning, he put out a flagship program, Free SHS.
Right.
And how did Ghanaians jump for this? This was one of the deepest desires of hearts of families and parents. Millions of children cannot go to school for financial reasons and for so many other reasons. Of course, people have criticized Free SHS. Yes, I agree, there have been some difficulties. You probably even need to review the whole program. But just remember the euphoria and the excitement with which Ghanaians greeted that, and on that basis and on the basis of other major critical programs that President Kufuor, then candidate Kufuor, put out, and Ghanaians received. We have seen the government implementing Free SHS to a very large extent. We have seen a lot of the difficulties. We have seen the potential and the future. And obviously, I don't think that at any time from now, any government will come in this country and say, there are difficulties with Free SHS, and so therefore I'm scrapping it and I'm going back. All you can do
I think administrations have said, and people have said time and again
then
that it is how we're doing it. In 2008, for example, people have said that the Kenyan example where day students were paying 23% of the fees, boarding students were just getting a little subsidy and all of that. All of those could be looked at. I don't think anyone has come out, whether from CSOs or the former administration, to say it is a bad thing.
Exactly.
So I agree with you.
So that's what I'm saying. You cannot scrap it. So you have to look at it again and see how you can tweak. For example, I would have suggested that there are families and parents who could pay. If we have a proper census, what you want to do with some of these interventions is to help more the vulnerable. So putting it across. But other persons will say, listen, we're all Ghanaians. We all have a right to the national cake. So whether I can pay or not is my right. The government puts it out. So we can look at some of those things. But it is one policy that
should we be looking? Have we got to those crossroads where we actually should be looking?
Oh, yes, I think so. I think so.
You think we should be looking at?
We need to review Free SHS, but we cannot roll back. We just have to go forward.
Roll back, I don't think.
We can't.
We started.
It won't be a good idea at all.
And I feel it's a good place to go.
Yes. But it's a major thing.
So you're intimating.
Now, you see, when people, of course, especially the opposition, I say especially, it's not only the opposition. There are some MPP top people who have also been critical of some aspects of the government's performance, especially with the economy and the most recent developments. Those have brought a lot of very critical comments about the performance of the economy and the government.
Right.
I would not say that the criticisms are wrong. They are not wrongly placed, because especially with the current haircut and all of those things, a lot of people are affected, and definitely people will react. So those ones, I would urge the government, the president, to take a critical look at it. If there is any way out, to relook at it, especially in terms of the demands of the IMF. Maybe we would have to take a critical look, because seriously speaking, where your currency goes down because the support of your currency is getting weaker and weaker, inflation is rising higher and higher.
Inflation has
prices,
now hit 54.1%.
I mean, those definitely,
it's still going up. Last year, at a point, our currency was the worst in the world. It came to third in the world, and I think fourth or fifth in Africa. But it really didn't look good. And inflation is also going up. But right before we continue with the economy, I just wanted to find out from you. You paint the picture then that Kufuor took over at the time when there was a crisis, so to speak.
Basically.
And so that has impacted his administration, right?
Throughout. It's been there. You're trying to deal with very fundamental issues. And introducing new major transformational policies which require so much resources.
Transformational policies. So we have 1D, 1F, planting for food and jobs, rearing for food and jobs, among other things. But to look at it holistically, which administration in the last 40 years plus has come and not faced some crises, plural, of some sorts? They have always, even going back to the 80s and Rawlings and the coups and everything, there were crises. Then we shifted to democratic rule, 1992. There were crises, so many of them. I remember at the time, rural electrification, for example, was a big problem. Education. Look, we've always had crises. When the NDC took over again in 2008, when Kufuor took over, there were obviously economic challenges. We went HIPIC, we did everything we had to. We got debt forgiveness. All of that happened. 2008, Attah Mills came through. They had their own issues. At a point in time, Doomso was a big issue. It resulted in so crises we've always had at some point as a developing, economy. Is that any excuse?
Yeah, but you see, when you talk about those crises, you are also not saying that they did not have an impact on the government's performance, any one of these governments that you're talking about, and that by the time that they left, we still didn't have some crisis on our hands.
Perhaps what I'm saying is it's not a valid excuse. When you take over, when you take over, and especially with the rhetoric of Kufuor, who said we have the men and we are in a hurry, we are coming to do it.
I wouldn't use the word excuse. I would use perspective. You would have to put it all in perspective and then judge. No government can come and give Ghanaians excuses. We don't want that. But of course, if you want to rate any government, it is important to look at the context and the perspective within which the government took office and how that would have impacted. I, for example, would have wished, especially again about free SHS, and the sheer quantum of money and resources that you need to implement it the way we introduced it. I would have wished that we had gone about it a different way. But we have introduced it. It is a very great transformational policy. Now we are hard up. We are strained. So what will be the creative ways of taking a second look at it in addition or in relationship to other development-oriented policies? So as for crisis, yes, but nobody can discount difficulties of this nature and say that the government should still go on this way and that way, irrespective of, it becomes a bit difficult.
Are the crises Kufuor inherited worse than the crises that, let's not even stretch to beyond the Fourth Republic, worse than the crises that other administrations from Rawlings to Kufuor to Attah Mills, Mahama have faced? Would you say in comparison
as for
he's
Rawlings,
had worse?
As for Rawlings, Rawlings in particular, if you bring Rawlings into the picture, it becomes a very skewed picture because Rawlings was the one who had reigned 11 years of so-called revolutionary rule, and he himself took over. So if there was a crisis 10 years before he came, we can look at it in terms of himself, and then another 8 years. So Rawlings is quite a peculiar factor.
I understand what you mean.
Yes, Rawlings is quite a peculiar factor. So indeed, if you talk about the Fourth Republic, you see, I wouldn't even want to go back into the past, because a lot of the things that Rawlings did, the 11 years of revolutionary government, are still impacting our society today. They are still impacting our economy today.
But the good things he did are also impacting our society today, right?
So you see, so that's why I'm saying, let us.
So it's a continuum both ways.
It is a continuum. It is a continuum. So when you come and deal with your situation, let us judge the government based on the context in which the government also took office. And I think on infrastructure, we have done fairly well. You know, on health, we have done fairly well. The government has introduced this major, again, transformational program of Agenda 1.1 and having a district hospital of a certain standard.
Practically nothing has taken off.
Well, it's taking off because it's big.
And recently, former President Mahama took on, and there was talk about whether it was 4 years or 2 years. But again, like you know, we're entering the electoral cycle. Yes. And you know what happens in that period. And the inability to mob up funds, and especially when you're going to the IMF. Yeah. That is a very
everything virtually stops. And I understand that. So, but I'm saying that on balance, especially from where the government took off, I would say that the government has had difficulties, let me admit, but has also had some strong points.
On that note, let me ask you, so in terms of credibility, in terms of what was said and what is being done, in terms of the deliverables, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the performance of Kufuor's administration?
A lot of criticism that our government has had is that the promises appear to have outweighed the delivery. I think that is a fair criticism. Okay. You know, and that MPP as a party should look at it. We still have another 1.5 years, if you like. We are in such critical difficulties with the IMF, but there are things that governments can always do to send a signal.
Right.
I would wish that, in spite of whatever the criticisms are fair or malicious, I think the government should critically look at 1 or 2 things that we can do to send a signal to Ghanaians that do not forget where we've come from, don't forget some of the key flagship programs that we have delivered.
Right.
But as we wind up as a government for this term, this is what we can also initiate or propose for Ghanaians going forward. You know, I don't think that because a government has had some difficulties, especially in the last couple of months, maybe up to the last couple of 2 years, 1.5 to 2 years, then that period alone should be the period on which the government should be scored. I don't think that would be fair.
What then would be your holistic score, looking at all the variables, the pluses, the minuses, the crises?
I wouldn't want to do the scaling in terms of 1 to 10, but let me say that I think criticism of the government's promises against delivery, that there had been much more promises than delivery, maybe it is fair. But the government also took off on the platform of a very difficult economic environment. And within that context, I think it's fair.
They also inherited some boons when it comes to the economy. There are always pluses and minuses.
Of course.
Quite a number of boons.
I agree with you, but I will still say that the difficulties the government inherited so far.
In fact, it has been said that this administration has got more than any other administration in terms of funds pouring in terms of our oil and all of that within this period. So, I mean, the pluses in terms of what the government has got, even on the back of COVID-19 and what we got comparatively, has been there.
I agree with you, but I'm still saying that maybe what we need to do, if we need to do this analysis, is to get the real data. I mean, if you had informed me that we needed to do this, then I probably would have brought you some. Then I can give you a 1 to 10 score that you're talking about.
I understand. So let's right before we get into Alan, go into what Alan Kyerematen is doing, and again, why you're even pitching camp.
Why?
I am interested because there are so many contenders you decided to pitch camp with him.
Suppose
yes, but there are reasons, right?
Yeah,
there are reasons, valid reasons. I'll get into
problem.
that. But very, very quickly on this, because we may not be able to get back to it. Again, on the economy, let's just spend about a minute and a half on this. There's the debt exchange program, the domestic debt exchange. And rarely would you see both sides of parliament coming into, in agreement like that. Some have said that it is because they themselves have invested their ex-gratia and other things in bonds, so they are going to be hard hit. We heard the majority leader say that this is going to wipe out the middle class. You've seen all the furore about it. And then there's this bit about breaking the 8. Just quickly, what do you make of the domestic debt exchange, which some say is being foisted down the throats of Ghanaians and is going to really hurt us economically? And generally, how do you think the economic crisis is going to affect the breaking of the 8? Briefly on that.
So about the domestic debt exchange, I think as far as I can think back, this is probably one of the most difficult policies that any Ghanaian government has introduced on the economic front, especially in the Fourth Republic. A policy that affects people's savings, people's investments, people who don't owe the government, having to bear the cost of government's debt. I think that is a very difficult one. And if you ask me, I would have wished that the government would not touch individual domestic investments, savings, because that goes to the core of people's lives and daily living. I had the story of one lady who said, look, even if I'm not going to get the interest, you give me my principal back. So people were hoping that at least it won't touch. It seems like, I don't know the details technically yet, I don't know all the details, but from the discussion that is going on, it appears it might even affect your principal. That one becomes really difficult. And looking at the sensitivity of it, I think MPP ought to be very, very cautious. The government...
And it's interesting why I pose that question, because the middle class usually is the group
the base that
votes for the MPP. And so if the middle class is going to take such a hit, as some would say, up to about 80% of the value of what they have.
It's a difficult... Look, I don't know what the timelines are. The last time I heard the president, I think he was saying the IMF discussions are going to end by the end of February. We still have a bit of time. The IMF is also a human institution. And I think that bit of the domestic debt, government has to take a look at it again. Look, before you even, I'm sure you might bring it up, it goes back to the issue of the finance minister. If you ask me, I'll tell you the finance minister has come to the end of his wits in terms of providing some new creative solution. It is possible within MPP to find somebody who would also come up with some radically new idea to help you get out of this crisis. Maybe, I've never talked about this matter, the president should consider the calls that our MPs and other well-meaning Ghanaians are making for the resignation of Kufuor Attah.
You're saying President Kufuor should consider the calls
I think he
for the
should
resignation
consider
of
those
Kufuor.
calls, because, you see, we have the men, and you said so. So are we saying that we can't find anybody within the NPP who can come up with some new idea? Everybody plateaus. Everybody gets tired. Everybody gets to the point where diminishing returns sets in.
Right.
And I, personally, if you ask me, I think Kufuor Attah has gotten to that point where diminishing returns has set in. Let's face it.
There's not much more he can
I don't
offer.
think so.
And with
But
all the
anyway,
baggage, he probably would do the party good.
But again, it is the president's constitutional prerogative.
Right.
I cannot insist too much, but it is possible. We could find some new
But promises have been made to the members of parliament. Let him complete this. Let him see us through the IMF program.
But now,
let's go through the budget.
Now we are in the middle of it, and it looks like some new ideas are not coming forward. So I don't know. Well, Maybe up to the, but I am saying it is possible. You can find somebody fresh. It will surprise you what that person might introduce, which would even shock the IMF and say, look, oh, so you had this kind of, I don't know. But that's for that.
If off the top of your head, you had to proffer one or two people who could very well, man our economy,
I wouldn't offer.
Who would you mention?
I wouldn't proffer that suggestion.
Dr. Esibe, who was the head
I've
of
heard
the
his
Finance
name
Committee
mentioned.
of Parliament.
He's a very sharp.
I mean, I spoke to him at a point
he's a
last
very,
year
very
and asked him
chap.
if you were asked to do it, and he says he would offer himself.
Esibe is a very brilliant chap, and even when he was in Parliament, I didn't have a lot of information about what he did day to day, but I knew, on the whole, he was a key pillar behind the scenes for the economic sector of the government. So obviously he's one of such names. I don't know, but
let's talk Alan Kyerematen, and
which is why you
the
invited
GTP,
me
and GTP and NATO and all these this talk. We'll check out some of what he's been saying. Why are you rooting for Alan Kyerematen? Why are you pitching camp with him, not with Vice President Bawumia, who likely would be going for the slot, not with Kennedy Ejapon, the Ascent Central Member of Parliament? Why Alan? Why?
Now, this is a very highly democratic party. And from the inception of this party, we've always had presidential primaries. In fact, it has never been the case that one person showed up for MPP presidential primary and went unopposed. It has never happened. So the culture is, the tradition is, the philosophy and the very foundation of MPP as a political party will tell you that at any time there is a slot for any position of leadership, you would have multiple names, people showing interest. And once you have that, you would have party members, party people supporting this one and supporting that one and supporting that one. Party members and party people have never supported one person across board. So it's part of the culture. So I'm just following the MPP culture. Somebody shows up, another person supports him, Alan shows up, I support him, Osefria Koto shows up, somebody else supports him. That is the culture of this party. So it is not strange at all that I would choose to support Alan Kyerematen. I mean, it's just part of the natural processes of democracy.
Is Alan Kyerematen the best option for the MPP going into election?
That one, I would say that's what I think. These are all people who qualify, people who all have certain backgrounds. But now you are talking about what are we going even to tell the electorate going forward. I've always said that what MPP does internally, especially in terms of electing a presidential candidate, electing a parliamentary candidate for a general election, is not simply for the purposes of internal elections. It is for the purposes of general elections. Now, when you look at the profile of Alan, within the party, Alan has served this party so well as a party member, right from scratch. Alan has been a member of this party, one of the founding members of the party, one of the leaders of one of the most important groupings, organs of this party, the Young Executives Forum.
Right.
Now, when you go to that point, people tend to forget where this party has come from and how its beginnings and its genesis has contributed to where it is today. Because if you didn't have that history, if you didn't have that foundation, there wouldn't be any MPP today, or that too. There would have been a different kind of MPP, which wouldn't have been as strong as it is today. All of your strength as a person, as an institution, as an organization, as a nation, depends very much on your antecedents, your roots, your foundation. And Alan is one of the persons who contributed so immensely to building that strong foundation.
When you say contributed immensely, are you talking of the cash element, which is his alias, actually?
Oh, yeah, it was. It was part of it.
He wouldn't be the only one, because Kennedy Japan has recently come out.
Yeah, but we're talking
Dr.
about
Dr. Makulu took a swipe at him. He came out and...
You're asking me about Alan, so let me just focus.
Right.
As a president of the Young Executives Forum, when Professor Dubois became the candidate, NPP as a party was in serious financial difficulties. Why? Jerry Rawlings, who had come as a revolutionary leader, had systematically and deliberately destroyed all the key financial pillars of MPP. And for that matter...
How did he do that?
I will show you. Rawlings announced on television, and I heard it myself, and I saw it myself, that Ghanaians should not buy Apia Menka's Apino soap. Because if they bought it...
I remember the soap. I don't know about it.
And he gave reasons that if Ghanaians bought it, Apia Menka will get money to go and do politics and come and overthrow government. So Ghanaians should not put money in Apia Menka's hands. Rawlings had destroyed Dr. Addison. Rawlings had destroyed Dr. Safodu. In fact, in the case of Safodu, Rawlings drove an armored car to the factory at Kwamo, close to Kumasi. It was a pharmaceutical manufacturing company, and commanded that the factory should shut down. The factory was in process. They switched off everything. Everything froze. Dr. Safodu never got back on his feet. J. Kufuor's own businesses had collapsed. Kreku, and a whole lot of them. So by the time MPP came in after the lifting of the ban...
To be fair as well, these are things you're saying, but we may not have all the evidence to back.
This is historical. That's why I'm saying it on public media.
Some of these things are said.
Wait. I'm very mindful.
I'm also looking at the other side, because I don't have all the facts.
Can you allow me, because I'm a journalist too, and I was working in the media.
Right.
I covered the trial of Safodu, that he had taken a loan from Africa Development Bank, not Ghanaian Bank, Africa Development Bank, and that he hadn't paid. Africa Development Bank hadn't come demanding the loan. And he was investing it in his business. He was a medical practitioner and also an investor. He was put on trial for taking a loan. He hadn't defaulted. He was still running the loan with the bank. Rawlings said no. It was for purely political reasons. So if you want the details, I can give you. Maybe some of you were much younger. So I'm saying that at the point that MPP came into the Fourth Republic, most of their pillars financially were flat.
Is that where Alan came in?
It fell on the young executives. Alan and that big group. Kandapa was part of the group.
Albert Kandapa.
Yeah, exactly.
The National Security Minister.
He was.
Right.
Bayredu, late Bayredu, a whole lot of Kwabra Japan, a whole lot of them came together. These were the group of young professionals and business people who were rough and tough and strong financially. And when it mattered most, they were the people. YEF was the group that bought a vehicle for Professor Dubois' campaign.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, Alan in that aspect has paid his dues.
Until now, yes.
Right.
So for that reason, I will support him.
Okay. You've given me good reason for backing him up. Let's get into some of what he's been saying now, though. He talks about a number of things, and some people have asked, why now? And you've been part of this administration. But let's listen to Alan Kyerematen in that latest address he gave to the nation.
If by the will of God and through your goodwill, I'm voted first as the flag bearer of the MPP and subsequently as president of the Republic in the next general elections, I will become the transformational leader of our time, who will build on the foundations that have been laid by successive leaders of our nation over the last 65 years. To achieve this strategic goal of transforming our dear country to become the shining star of the new Africa, I will, as president, launch and lead the execution of the Great Transformational Plan, GTP of Ghana, which will span the period 2025 to 2030. The post-COVID economic recovery program currently being implemented with the anticipated support from the IMF from 2023 to 2025 will be a transitional economic program leading to the rollout of this great transformational plan. The arrogance of power has been a major obstruction to progress in our country. People in positions of authority must understand that leadership is an opportunity to serve the people and not to lord over them. In servant leadership, humility is an asset and not a weakness.
Alan Chamating, who wants to be flag bearer of the MPP there. Let me come back into the studio. So he has a 7-point plan, the 7-point agenda. But we've always had, for example, some of the things he talks about. The National Development Planning Commission. Sometime last year, I spoke with the head of that institution. And Alan himself has been thrust, so to speak, both during the Kufuor era and the Kufuor era, in a crucial ministry, trades and industry, under which the flagship program, 1D1F, fell. And with some of what he's been talking about, the private sector and all of that, people ask, but Alan, what have you done when you've been charged with 1D1F? From that standpoint of his rhetoric, what is new, so to speak?
First of all, let's look at the record of Alan in government as you connect it to 1D1F. And what you say, people are saying, I don't know whether you say 1D1F has not succeeded or not, but you see...
Has it?
Alan has been in government...
No, let's look at that. I'll come to that. Has 1D1F succeeded?
I'll come to that. Alan has been in government before, and we saw his performance under Kufuor. Same ministry. But even before then, before Alan became Minister of Trade and Industry under Kufuor, Alan had been ambassador of Ghana to the US. Right. Now, when Alan was ambassador, he initiated a lot of discussions with the US government on what we now have as AGOA and the program to deepen our trade relationship with the United States. Again, Alan was the one who actually, when I heard about this, I was quite baffled because I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. People wanted to raise issues about Alan and try and smear him in connection with some of these same internal contests and so on. And then the NDC also latched onto it, that Alan had caused financial loss to the state by selling a certain property that Ghana had in the US and buying another for the embassy. And that this was a waste and this was this and that. So I went there. And I visited Ghana's ambassador's residence in the Potomac district of Washington, D.C. And I was told by Ambassador Odusei Bewua, who was then ambassador, that this is the place Alan bought for Ghana. And I said, but I thought they said Alan caused financial loss to the state by this transaction. He said, you know, people talk about these things when they don't even know what is going on. They're just interested in the propaganda and they pick it up. If today, Ghana even decided to sell that property in the Potomac district of Washington, D.C., and get another property in a fairly good area still in Washington, I'm sure they will have 2 or 3 more properties. So this is a person, I think, has a very far-sighted view of things. Sometimes, when you are like that, others who may not have the same perspective of life will have some difficulties with you. You might be thinking way ahead, and then we want to think about here and now, we would have some difficulties too. Alan coming into President Kufuor's government, trade and industry. It was President Kufuor's initiative, actually supported basically by Alan. In fact, once it is the president, you don't want to shift the emphasis onto the minister, but PSIs under Alan, garments, salt, oil palm, cassava. Up until this day that I speak to you, some of the industries are having difficulties as a result of the general economic difficulties. But these are aspects of the program that Alan initiated then, which are still today thriving. Oil palm, cassava, Guinness is taking cassava from Ayensu starch and other sources as part of their major raw material for production of beer today. And people talk about the starch initiative having failed. And they haven't checked with Guinness. They haven't checked what's going on.
But does Guinness alone make it a success?
So isn't it good enough for you to
I'm not saying that it is not good, but does that alone make it a success?
But I'm talking about that. I'm talking about AGWA and the government initiative. I'm talking about SALT, that initiative today. SALT has opened up a new vista for economic investment. And it started from somewhere. People were doing SALT.
The electrochem situation, or which one?
I'm not talking about particular companies. I'm talking about that whole shift and focus on SALT. There are people who are even in the media gurus, who are now investing big time in salt production. It's all part of that initiative that was put out by Alan, supported by President Kufuor at the time. So if you look at this person, again, he comes into President Kufuor's government, and then he takes off with the 1D, 1F. As we speak today, the number of jobs that 1D, 1F has created, I'm told in excess of 100,000 or so, direct, indirect.
You see,
the number of factories,
the devil usually is in the detail.
Yes,
when you get into I mean, we've been told about watermelon factories, rice factories,
wait a second.
Wale. You go there and there's
wait a second. The president himself, President Kufuor himself, at every opportunity, has talked about the success of the work that Alan Kyerematen, as his minister, has done every opportunity. So are we saying that the president was lying when he says that one of my best performing ministers? Look at the 1D, 1F initiative.
The president has also categorized Kufuor as one of his best performing ministers.
But the public is the judge.
A lot of people
but the public is the judge.
So I'm just using that same benchmark.
Yeah, but if you want to do that, nobody requested or demanded the resignation of Alan Kyerematen, but people have demanded. So I put it in that perspective. So you see, when the president praised Alan, the people on the ground never called for his resignation. And the evidence of his success, I'm telling you, if MPP is going to go into the next election, one of the sectors MPP would find a message to present to Ghanaians, in spite of the difficulties that we are facing now, is that, look, we need an export-driven, agricultural-based, industrializing economy. Otherwise, we will never find the strength to be able to change the face of our economy.
It's interesting.
Jobs, the value of the dollar, and export investment and export earnings. These are one of the key things, some of the key things that would immediately give you assurance and hope that, yes, you can now talk about transformation. Because you see, when you talk about transformation and you start from the service areas, which tend to be sink areas, like health, like education, and you don't focus a lot more on the productive areas, agriculture, industry, export, they may all be good transformational policies, but you need a lot more resources.
You bring up these points because when you look at his 7-point agenda, he talks about these, the primacy of the private sector, and then he would feed that into our work ethic and discipline, and then talk about corruption, petty thievery, and all of that.
And agriculture. He put it, he connected agriculture.
He puts all of them together. But when you look at the private sector, really, the private sector is on its knees now in many ways because of the economic downturn. It's the same private sector he's speaking of, and it's the same private sector he has, interacted with over this period. What is going to be different under Alan Kyerematen?
Every president comes with their focus. President Kufuor came with his focus. At that time, the very structure and foundation of the economy was totally broken. So President Kufuor focused on macroeconomic restructuring, and then also focused on some social initiatives like national health insurance and free maternal child care and so on. But his key focus was the economy was not just on its knees, flat on its belly, to the extent that President Kufuor had to boldly declare HIPIC and get some relief in order for the economy to get back. And in that respect, President Kufuor was able to rebuild the foundation. That was his focus. He succeeded to a very large extent. President Kufuor came with free SHS, Now, if a president announces his focus and tells his cabinet that now this is my focus, we have all these other sectors, but my focus strategically is education, free SHS. So, Finance Minister, I want 30%, 40% of all of our earnings to be invested in free SHS. Obviously, resources are going to be made available to whoever is managing that sector, much more, even though all other sectors will be getting their resources. Alan comes and says that my focus, should you, my good friends and family members, MPP, make me the candidate, and the good people of Ghana consider me, looking at my record from MPTech, when I was not even in government, my focus was the private sector. And I have built quite a number, I don't need to come and mention names here, a number of private sector businesses across this country, in other African countries. Even when Alan was not a minister, was not even in government, he was already, his business, his own business for livelihood was building the private sector or helping to build the private sector. He came in government, we saw him in trade, his interactions with the private sector and all of that. So now he says, look, if I am president, I have shown you from the track record of my own career as a private person, as a government minister, that as for the private sector, it is probably the dearest to my heart. As for trade policy, as for industrialization policy, Alan has been an advisor and a consultant of the UN for a number of African countries on trade, industry.
And we know of that record.
Exactly.
It's so interesting.
So when Alan tells you that my focus, the primacy of my policy will be private sector, it's not new.
My only concern, my only, I don't want to call it pessimism, but the private sector, yes, even at the tail end of the Rawlings administration, there was a bit of a push. I get it. From the start, it was problematic.
Private sector.
At the tail end, there was that. You cannot take that away from him. Kufuor drove that.
Exactly.
Atta Mills came in, also pushed that agenda.
Yes.
Mills, Mahama also came in, did his bit, and now we have a Kufuor. Nothing much has changed. And the point is this. All the countries that we were rubbing shoulders with back then, the Malaysias, the Indonesias, and even India back then when we gained independence comparatively, have moved on the back of industrialization. We have had all the talk, and maybe that is why Alan Chamate talks about NATO, no action, talk only.
You answered that question.
But he himself, has he done much in that regard?
So much. I'm surprised that in spite of the history of Alan's personal passion.
I mean, it's become like a mantra now. They all say it, but nothing
I'm not talking about they all. I'm saying how many of the politicians that we're looking at, whether MPP or NDC, have for their lifetime been so focused and committed to helping the private sector of Ghana develop and build, training and reorganization, helping private businesses from MPTech Ghana to MPTech Africa. This one went even beyond Africa, and the United Nations recognized it. UNDP and UNCTAD recognized Alan's role in helping to focus and strengthen the private sector. Now, I tell you, you're talking about presidents that have come, everybody has done their bit. In fact, as I sit here, I can remember the focus of President Kufuor. I know the focus of President Kufuor. I don't even remember the focus of John Mahama. So maybe you can also help me. Presidents come, and everything that the president will do, the government will do.
In terms of what?
The strategy for every government will pick at least one or two areas.
The Mahama administration focused on infrastructure, roads. You need that for your economy.
So here we
healthcare. You spoke about those when you started.
And all of them.
All that infrastructure.
Yes, you say all of them focus on something. They all talk about something. By the time John Mahama left, can we say that our road infrastructure was out of the woods? We can't. Even though
can we say that it was as bad as before?
Of course not. Of course not. So, but I'm saying simply that when someone is in the seat as the number one person, is different from being I dare say, a mere president.
So you're basically telling me that Alan Kyerematen, if he is president, will be somehow different from Alan Kyerematen as a trade minister.
See, but you see, that is even the more reason why John Mahama, for example, should not be contesting presidency at all again. Why? He's been vice president before. He's been president before. We are not even asking what is John Mahama going to bring, which is extraordinary. But we need a president anyway after Kufuor. Nobody can say that MPP and NDC, they've been here before, so they cannot or they don't have a right to put up a candidate. MPP is in government, they will still put up a candidate. NDC was in government before, they put up candidates.
Would it then be fair with that analogy, though I'm shifting from Alan Kyerematen a bit, the Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, some have taken him on that, I mean, he's failed to deliver on many scores, especially in terms of where we find ourselves economically. Would you say then that he too, I mean, using the same line of reasoning, should even be putting himself forward to be flag bearer of your party? And if your party voted for him, I mean, what would that mean?
The issue of the vice president, when it comes to the internal thing again, sometimes people are oversensitive. But I think sometimes too we should be a little objective, even about our own things. Now, incidentally, it's so funny, but incidentally, a lot of times when people complain about the economy under our government now, they talk much less about President Kufuor, and they talk much more about the vice president. That one, I'm sure you're in the media, so you would have heard. So a lot of the bashing that people have had against our current government in terms of the economy has been directed at the vice president. And if you hit the streets, you hear a lot of the criticism. As a party person, I would just say that, look, incidentally, the vice president is still also a bit younger than Alan Kyerematen. He has a bit of time. Two, if it is the case that a lot of the criticism that MPP is facing on the economic front, even the president, people don't even talk about him much, the vice president. Now, if you go and put that same face on your ballot paper, and you ask the president, the people, majority of whom are apparently complaining about this person, then it means that you are forcing the people that whether they like it or not, they should vote. So you look at the perception, you look at the vibes, you look at the... So I would suggest that in that same vein, and I do agree with the principle that I set, I would say that maybe the vice president should recede a little bit for now, spend some time, and then that criticism, oh, you have always been the chairman of the EMT. People say, but Alan was a member. Yes, you're a member, you're not chairman. You're not vice president. You're not in that position. So some of these issues, but that would be my suggestion. Of course, nobody can stop anyone who has an ambition.
So for you, yes, democratically speaking, we all have that level playing field, so to speak.
I am sure that the criticism that I used
just to get it clear,
John Mahama, I'm sure some people might use it also against...
But you are suggesting that on the back of everything that has happened and the negativity and the perception, the vice president should step aside.
That's what my suggestion is. But
and not contest for the flag bearership.
That is my suggestion. And it is not... My suggestion is not a decree. And it is only a suggestion.
But aren't you merely saying that because you are in support of someone else from the
Absolutely
not. AKA Alan Kyerematen?
I think I gave you the perspective, you know. Unless, of course, you don't agree with me.
So you feel wholly, roundly, Alan Kyerematen is a better candidate for the MPP going into election 24 than Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia?
But Dr. Bawumia is not the only one who is showing interest. So there are others. So it's not just him.
I get it, but most people will tell you that the front runners are your candidate and the vice president.
But it is still a broad basket with other names showing up. My choice, my preference is Alan. I've given you a bit of reason why I think Alan is the best.
Two quick matters.
MPP.
Looking at the time we have left. He talks about corruption.
Yes.
And I find it interesting. The finance minister himself, sometime last year or so, mentioned that we lose about $4 billion to corruption every year. Other statistics will peg it at as high as $6 billion plus. Imagine if we had that in our kitty, we probably wouldn't be going to the IMF.
Obviously not.
And he also talks about the arrogance of power. We've moved away from the private sector and developing a GTP and all of that. On these two issues, in about a minute, what exactly is Alan going to do differently? You've seen the reports, Afrobarometer, even last year, a more not perceptive one, realistic one, the Ghana Statistical Service and all of that. How is he going to do this?
Well, of course, I cannot sit here and give you the specific details of what Alan, should he become president, will do. I think what he himself did with the statement was to just give a broad framework so that people will have a sense. Because if you want to contest for the presidency, people should have a sense of, so what new thing, what different thing do you have to offer? So Alan has just tried to do that. So if you ask about corruption, you ask about arrogance of power, he's talking about himself. He said, look, it is clear that one of the things that have bedeviled our society is the arrogance of power, where people feel that once they're in a certain position, and it's not just politicians, I bet you, people in the public sector, people in the judicial system, people in the security systems, the police and so on. I mean, we generally as a people seem to be more interested in the trappings of power rather than delivering the responsibility and obligations of power. Alan says, I'm going to focus not just on the trappings, but on what that power obliges me to deliver. So that in that sense, I will be a leader, a servant leader for you, not just to throw my weight about. So if
you're going to what he says about the arrogance of power.
But that's exactly what I'm talking about now. He's talking about himself. And really, we cannot deny that we have it in our society.
Alan is said to have lost his... You remember there was a time when President Kufuor said that, look, after me, Alan must come.
Yeah.
And then...
I was there, right there on the spot.
Then, you know, in 2016 and all of that, Alan went ahead to contest again, I mean, before 2016. And some feel with that, he lost that opportunity to continue right after Kufuor. And that, yes, because there was a point where he conceded, look, okay, let Kufuor go. Yes. And there was some sort of tacit agreement. And then later, he contended him again ahead of 2016. Some have said that means he lost his opportunity. What is your very quick take on that?
But this one is really awkward because you see, Nana Kufuor, either as candidate or a member of the party or president, is not the one who gives opportunity for anybody to contest. The party constitution decides that whoever feels qualified and whoever will indeed be qualified by the constitution and the party structures may contest.
Right.
So how come some private discussion or some message of goodwill becomes the law that says that since I said
for that we should just leave it to the devil?
Yeah, of course.
What happens if Alan Chemanting loses? What happens if he loses? And how do you feel about the whole bit about let's have an Alan Bawumia pairing?
Oh, that one, they've asked me several times. I said, that is not a realistic proposal.
Why not?
That is not a proposal to be considered. Now, if you look at the party's constitution, the candidate, after being elected, has the constitutional right and privilege to nominate his running mate.
Right.
And then the council endorses it, and then we go. Now, in the case of Nana Kufuor, in 2007, after the primary, 2008, he needed to come up with a running mate. He proposed a name. Most of council members did not support. So then he was not happy, really, but he had to reconsider. Within the period, some members also proposed a name to Nana Kufuor. He didn't like the name. He wasn't happy. There were a lot of backroom discussion. It didn't work. He rejected it. And then enter Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, who was not even a member of the party at all. So you can imagine what kind of opposition and reaction. So you couldn't find anybody who is a member qualified under our constitution.
You have to go outside the party.
5 years, good standing. So no, yes, no, yes. There was a huge.
So on
fight.
The back of those democratic principles, we should just leave matters.
Wait a second. Yes, wait a second. So then, even when Dr. Bawumia was not a member of the party, after a long discussion, President Kufuor said, "Look, the constitution says the candidate has a right
Right.
So let us consider it for him. After all, when he becomes president and he is the vice president, he's the one he's going to work closely with personally. So in that respect, apart from the constitutional stuff, when you pre-arrange, what have you done? You are foisting a running mate on whoever becomes the.
So by all means, former President Kufuor, who says let the democratic principles
exactly,
go.
and it did work. And then also, and then just to finish off with it, you see, when you do that, now you have set what I will consider to be a very dangerous precedent, because once it becomes a precedent, why shouldn't anybody in the future, if it suits them, also refer to it?
Let's just have a partner.
Let the Constitution help you. Constitution.
What happens if Alan loses? Would he then be receptive to becoming a vice presidential candidate?
Why would you want to preempt all of that? Leave it to Alan.
No, but is he open to it?
I wouldn't say. I cannot say. And you see, when
you speak for him and you cannot say whether he'd be receptive to it or not.
People seem to want a certain arrangement by all means. That feeling I will reject outright. Why should people just limit it to Alan Bawumia? Let this party be MPP. Let MPP be MPP. Those of us who are in the leadership now of MPP, we will die and go. Another generation will take over from us. So the things that we do today, I think we should be careful not to think that we are going to be here forever. And so we are setting a precedent that the future generation, whether they like it or not, will have to refer to.
Let's wrap the conversation on the Christian tangent. Two questions put together. Some have said that the flag bearer must be Christian because of the large Christian population in the country, and that if you went for someone who wasn't Christian, and we are not trying to practice religious segregation here, we're just re-echoing what people have said. How do you feel that will work in your party? Do you agree with such a suggestion? Of course, that would also work against non-Christian contenders. And we saw that with Aliu Mahama, if you recall, not necessarily the Christian thing, not necessarily the religious thing, but the fact that he was vice president, he was Muslim, contested, and shockingly, fell way off the radar. I think he placed third or fourth. Then there is the National Cathedral Project, also Christian in outlook. Your quick take on these two in just about a minute, if you can.
You see, when these issues come up, I respond to them as a former general secretary, basically focusing on strategic objectives and what will help us achieve that. What is the strategic objective of any political party that goes into election? To win. Whether your votes come from a Christian bloc or a Muslim bloc or an atheist bloc, in that respect, we're not looking at the religious factor. We're looking at, so where do most of the votes come from? And you push your strategy towards that.
But when your population is over 70-something% Christian.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. If you are a Christian community, a Christian nation majority, and you've checked the voting patterns of Christians, and you want to win, it's good to show them.
Are you admitting tacitly that it would be not in the interest of the party to vote a non-Christian?
I am saying that I'm looking at
as flag bearer.
I'm looking at it strategically. I gave this analogy.
So it would make sense to vote a Christian as flag bearer for the MPP?
My friend, I am telling you, this is a strategic issue which MPP has to consider. I was telling one of my older friends, a very venerable chief, he raised the same question with me. I said, Nana, so if I am the agent for Bentley or Rolls-Royce or Mercedes, but my hometown is from Ponso, about 12 or so kilometers off the Kumasi Road, before Nkoko. And I say, I want to honor my village competitor. So I go and put my showroom for Bentley and Rolls-Royce and Mercedes in that village to show them that I love them. I want to honor the village, so I brought my headquarters here, my showroom is here. Who buys Bentleys? They are in the cities. So if you are a businessman who have your eye on the market, you go where the market is most prospective.
Okay.
That's all I can tell.
I thank you for that. The National Cathedral, do we need a National Cathedral right now?
Right now, obviously, the economic situation dictates that we take a second look.
Should we put it on ice for now?
I think so.
We should put it on hold?
I think so, because initially, I don't think that my understanding was that it's going to be funded like from public funds, you know. But if it is going to be funded by public funds, then it's a problem. If it's not going to be funded by public funds...
By and large, it is being funded by public.
That is where the difficulty comes. If it is going to be a public-funded project, then for now, I think we can put it on hold. After all, God says, I don't necessarily live in buildings made with concrete and mortar. I live in the heart.
Made by human hands.
I live in the hearts of people. So if we are truly committed to the Lord in our hearts, and we haven't even built a cathedral, the Lord will still be happy with us.
Alan for all.
Alan for all, yes.
And now heading to. Thank you for joining us for this conversation.
So
it's been interesting. First time having it.
But you should have alerted me on some of the issues. Then I would have brought some more particulars. But anyway,
we'll remedy that.
It's okay. It's okay.
Hope it was enjoyable for you.
It was okay. Oh yeah. I haven't been in the media space for a long time. People were asking, so why we don't?
It is true.
Yeah. So at any opportunity, once it is a good one, I would show up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nana Hininto, of course, is a former General Secretary of the MPP, and he is firmly rooted in the Alan Chemating camp. You heard him at the end saying, Afakrevi, Alan for all. Well, right before we take a break and come to you with more of our big stories, we all know water is life. It regulates your body temperature, keeps you alive and kicking. Well, guess what? Awake is premium purified water treated through a strict purification process to ensure that every bottle in the market refreshes you much better. We have the perfect sizes for all occasions, 330 and 500 ml bottles to fit your pockets and bags, 750 ml for the heavy drinkers, and 1.5 liters for those who always want more. We have also introduced our special 19-liter jars for offices and homes. So all you need to do now is just stay awake with Awake Purified Drinking Water wherever you go. So come on, grab your bottle of Awake Water and get quality, top-notch hydration. Awake Purified Drinking Water, one for life. This is heartwarming. Remember, for every bottle you purchase, an amount is donated to the National Cardiothoracic Center. It's produced by Casapreco. For bulk purchases, just call 0262 351 251. Remember, this advert is FDA approved. When we return, more action on the AM show. Do stay.
Hello, good morning to you. Happy New Week, and thank you for staying on the AM show. I'm Bernice Lansah. This morning, we are going to have a conversation about peace in Ghana. You know, it's often referred to as the beacon of peace in this particular part of the world. And there are a lot of organizations putting in a lot to help us work at maintaining that peace, keeping it intact, and even growing it beyond what we know. And this morning, I have been joined by Sheikh Arimayal Shaibu. He's a member of the Governing Board of the National Peace Council, spokesperson of the National Chief Imam, and Alisa Mogre, Program Manager, Youth and Peace Building at the Catholic Relief Services, which is the CRS. Would also later be joined by Stefan Hulich, Regional Security Coordinator, West Africa at the Netherlands Embassy in Ghana. Let me say good morning to Sheikh and Lisa, who are in the studio. Good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning.
Good morning. And the Catholic Relief Services that you work for, Lisa, has been doing a lot of tremendous work in different parts of the country, but you're hoping to take that further. And so you've put together a new initiative. Tell us about it.
Good morning to you once again and to all your cherished viewers out there. It's a pleasure to be here. So Catholic Relief Services, also called CRS, has been in Ghana for quite a while now, since 1958. And we do not only work in peace building initiatives, but Catholic Relief Services has done a lot in the area of water, sanitation and hygiene, agriculture, health, emergency, and cross-cutting themes like gender. So under the youth and peace building portfolio, that is what this project falls under. It is called Prevention of Violent Extremism through Social Accountability. So this is a new initiative, and it was started just last year in October, not too long ago, with funding support from the Netherlands Embassy in Ghana. So this is a one-year initiative we are just about to launch into.
And this prevention of violent extremism through social accountability, tell us the thinking behind it. There are various ways of preventing violent extremism, but why are you choosing this route?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. So when we talk about violent extremism, where force, fear, and intimidation is used to advance an ideological preference, be it political, social, or religious, there are a lot of factors behind it. We have the push and pull factors. Now, in tackling violent extremism, there are a broad array of options we have. We are zeroing in on social accountability because contextually in Ghana, we realize that the relationship between the civilians and the security forces can be better. And we are looking at a system where CRS can help through this POVETA project to support the national peace-building institutions we have, of which National Peace Council is one, to support them so that they can work at improving the relationship, which ultimately would lead to the prevention of violent extremism.
It's interesting you talk about the relationship between the security forces and civilians. And Sheikh, it brings to mind what we saw in the last year and the year before that, where there were a series of stories about military people brutalizing other people. We saw what happened in other parts of the country. And it was painful when you had to report some of these things because obviously you know the ripple effect it has on the general security as a whole. You're with the National Peace Council. Tell us how this relationship with the Catholic Relief Services has been over the years.
With respect to how the security agencies have conducted themselves, I think now we can say there's a complete departure from the use of brute force in trying to establish maybe peace or order.
Would you say complete departure?
I mean the national security, what they call it, national security apparatus, for example, have developed what you call the whole society approach into dealing with this violent extremism. And that's why if you go to the northern part of the country, you find that the approach now is to say that, look, as military people, we come and we are for you. We do not come to impose ourselves on you. We do not come in the first approach where we now use fear to show that it is through fear we can create order. So now you find that some of the social needs of the local people have been provided by the military people. Roads, sinking of wells, helping them with certain social amenities. Because what they realized was that if we do not do, the terrorists come and they dwell on those social services gaps in order to build confidence and trust between them and the terrorists. So to replace that, now what the military and the others, what do you call it, security apparatus would want to do is to now establish a good working relationship, understanding, trust, and confidence, so that through the local people, they can even get information trickling in as to whether some terrorists are entering into the country. And this, the Peace Council, is so much interested because we view security and peace as two faces of the same coin. There can be no comfort and stability when security is undermined. And when there's security and you cannot find peace, still you cannot find. So these are two components of the same situation that we are dealing with. That's how come now we are entering into this kind of partnership with the Catholic Relief Services to really launch this program in close partnership. Because you know the Peace Council, our mandate is to facilitate and develop mechanisms for preventing, managing, and then resolving conflicts. But to do so, the functions that we have to do is to use networking. And so this one gives us opportunity for that kind of networking, where between us and other civil society organizations, we are able to now build a certain social trust. Because it is clear that if you develop mechanism for security and peace at the top level, at the policy level, and they're detached from what is the reality on the ground, you will not be able to achieve it. And that is why such social accountability projects in the way that the professor that we are going to do is so important for us.
I'll come back to you, Lisa, to give us the details of how POVETSA will be implemented. But Sheikh, talking about resolving conflicts and why it's important not to leave gaps for some of these violent extremist groups to take advantage of, brings to mind one major problem we have, which is unemployment. I mean, you've spoken about the social amenities that are not available, and the soldiers, you say, are doing that. That's brilliant. But how do we ensure that young people have something to do, something to earn, so that somebody doesn't come promising to give them something and in the end brainwashes them into doing unthinkable things?
Unemployment, without questioning, without any debate, is one of the major vulnerability factors in our country that undermines the peace of our country. And several research platforms and the Peace Council and our engagement with some other organizations, we have clearly come out with this as a concern. So our view is that we make recommendations to government to look at what are the different avenues that we can use to create wider avenues for young people, because the more the number of young people grows without the commensurate job opportunities or the skills that they need to be able to lead a productive life, that is when they become vulnerable to the approaches of these terrorists and violent extremists who enter, and they come to them with assurances and gifts, come to them with opportunities, and so on and so forth. So if you leave the gap unaddressed, definitely then we also now live to see the risk of some of them being roped into that kind of activity. So I think ours is to make a recommendation to government, and I think that we have used different platforms to bring this one up. We hope that the government will explore all avenues in the agriculture sector, in the educational sector, in other areas where, even in the private sector, where wider opportunities need to be created so that what government is unable to absorb by way of employment, the private sector will be able to absorb. And so we now get our youth productively engaged. Once they are engaged, I don't think that we will still be contending with the risk of this problem of youth unemployment.
Right. So it's important we have this conversation this morning because, you know, we are moving into an election year. The internal party elections have already, not the elections per se, but the political conversation around those elections have already started, and people are beginning to throw stuff, you know, at different camps and all that. And we know how things turn out eventually. So this morning we are having a conversation about the prevention of violent extremism through social accountability, short POVETSA project, and it's by the Catholic Relief Services, and they're getting enormous support from the Netherlands Embassy here in Ghana. And this morning, Stefan Hulis, who is Regional Security Coordinator for West Africa at the Embassy, joins the conversation. Good morning to you. Why? Good morning. Good morning. Great. Why is this important for Netherlands?
Yeah. Well, the Netherlands has been a close partner of Ghana in the field of development for many years, for decades. And we have been a very active player in West Africa in the field of diplomacy, in the field of security interventions, and in the field of development. And we have seen these developments in the last few years, and we're very concerned about it because we see that there are gains in the region and that they might be lost in the years to come because of these developments. So we find it very important to support countries in the region in their fight against extremism.
So if I get you, this is not just for Ghana, but West Africa at large, because I was just going to find out from you that Ghana appears to be an island, especially within this sub-region when it comes to peace. Look at our neighbors, look in Burkina Faso, look in other places where which sometimes are being used as routes to enter Ghana. Last year, there were concerns that some extremists coming through Nigeria were coming in through Togo and all that. So here in Ghana, it's Povetsa. Is it the same in these neighboring African countries?
Yeah, it's quite remarkable that Ghana has been spared so far, because, as you mentioned, all neighboring countries have suffered terrorist attacks. Particularly Benin has been suffering a lot. 50 attacks in the last year, but also the neighbor Togo in the last year, several attacks, we're very concerned that it's a matter of time that Ghana will be victim of violent extremism. We see these developments coming from the Sahel, violent extremist organizations, terrorist organizations that are moving southwards, particularly in Burkina Faso. And they are settling in the border regions with Ghana, Ivory Coast, Togo and Benin. So let's just be open about this. They're very close to Ghana, and there's no doubt about it. They're already using Ghana as a hideout and as a place for illegal activities to provide themselves with financial resources. But thank God, Ghana has been spared violent extremism and terrorist attacks so far.
Last year, we had quite a scare, and our national security apparatus came up with a campaign, See Something, Say Something, where people were encouraged to call in to inform security officials about any suspicious characters or movements that they had noticed or realized. It's good to know that Ghana has been spared so far, but it appears that if we let our guards down, it will only just be a matter of time before these terrorists come in. And it's as though Ghana is like the last giant to slay. And it will be an achievement for them, as we've spoken to some of our security experts who say that sometimes it's not just about coming to Ghana, because the question is what's here for them. It's just about, putting it on their record that we were able to do this in Ghana. So what must we begin to look at? I mean, Povetsa is great, but in terms of building a greater network within the sub-region, within neighboring countries, to ensure that we push this as far back as we can, because if we isolate ourselves and say, oh, we're just going to do it here, it would just be a matter of time, I guess.
You're completely right. I mean, terrorist organizations, they don't stop at the border. We have to be frank, the border regions in this region are very porous. It's very easy to move from one side to the other. So regional cooperation is crucial, and organizations like the Accra Initiative, ECOWAS, they could and should play a role in this to enhance regional cooperation. Because if countries want to tackle it individually and are not cooperating with their neighbors, I think it's going to be even more of a struggle. So yeah, we very much support initiatives like the Accra Initiative, and we would like to see ECOWAS taking the lead in this fight against the violent extremism.
But do you think we have done enough so far? I mean, I know it's progressive in these things, but does it appear to you that this is a front burner? Is it something that's really on the minds of our leaders? They want to really deal or tackle with this?
I think it's on the mind of your leaders, definitely. I just see that it's not easy to enhance regional cooperation. We've seen it in other fields, and in the field of terrorism, it's a very sensitive topic. Countries need to share intelligence, need to work together militarily, and that's not an easy thing to do. We've seen it in other parts of the world as well. So I think there's a political will. We hear your president repeated regularly that there's an imminent threat. And he took the lead during a conference recently in Accra on the Accra Initiative to make sure that countries in the region would work together.
Right, Stefan, I'll come back to you, but back in the studio, Lisa, so tell us how this POVETSA will be implemented. I see that it's centered a lot on trust building. It's as though you're trying to tackle it from the very soft angle of it. So tell us the plan. How is this going to be executed?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, as Catholic Relief Services, we do not work in isolation. And it's the same for the implementation of POVETSA. CRS is not going to do it alone. We have our key implementing partners. National Peace Council, of course, is one. We also have a civil society organization on board called SECUTAPS, the Center for Conflict Transformation and Peace Studies. These are the two main implementing partners on POVETSA. But then we cannot talk about building the relationship between civilians and security agencies without bringing security agencies on board. So we are looking at a broader scope of stakeholders, all the security agencies, the Ghana Armed Forces, the Ghana Prisons, Immigration, the police services. We also have another category of stakeholders who would be joining this conversation in POVETSA. We are looking at the traditional authorities as well as the religious leaders, because when it comes to violent extremism, we need the help from all the quarters. So other civil society organizations also in this space. So in terms of how we plan to implement POVETSA, we are looking at, first of all, understanding what the contextual situation is. What are the current challenges that are happening between civilians and security agencies? We need to find out more why those things are happening. That's going to be the first step. So it's going to be an analysis of the current situation. Then we are looking at having a conversation between these two groups of people, bringing them together, hopefully with the aim of coming out with a sort of national framework that can guide the discourse. So we are looking at it in terms of having a national framework, bringing all the relevant partners on board. And then if you have a national framework on this and all the security agencies, the top hierarchy, they all sign onto it, what next? We have to talk about implementation, as it is with a lot of frameworks. So then the conversation cannot also be just at the higher level. We are going to go down to the regional networks. That's where National Peace Council is going to play a major role. We will have some regional forums to discuss how the implementation of this national framework would be. So we are looking at also sensitizing a key group, which is the youth. We would have a lot of capacity building sessions with the youth, talk about, and we will focus in terms of geographics. We are going to look at some of the border towns like Paga in Upper East, Hamley in Upper West. These are very prone to violent extremism based on their location. So we'll be engaging the youth, the authorities at that level as well. So ultimately, the plan for POVETSA is, at the end of the day, we have a practical, a feasible, and easy to implement national framework that looks at a kind of social accountability so that security forces are accountable to civilians and civilians also take up their role. So we want their relationship to be improved at the end of the day, and something has to guide that. What can they do? What should they not do? Who has oversight on what they do? How do civilians respond when there are grievances? As Sheikh mentioned, usually for violent extremism, sometimes they come in through grievances. They present a platform like, okay, there's hope here, come on board, we'll give you a sense of identity, a sense of nurturing. So we now have to look at how do we plot those loopholes such that the youth are not so aggrieved by how it is perceived security agencies treat them. Yeah.
Very interesting. The conversations around security can never be exhausted, and that's why it's important that we keep having them and put them on the minds of a lot of people. But Sheikh, you were with the Peace Council, and quite recently I had a conversation with your chairman on the issue in Boko. And he was very concerned, and even the residents there, including an MCE who witnessed his neighbor being killed, have expressed a lot of worry. The MCE had reason to even suggest that probably if this is given a more nationalistic perspective, the problem in Boko will be solved. There have been suggestions that, look, there is a possibility that some violent extremists may be taking advantage of the situation there to make it look as though it is the Boko issue, but, you know, step into to foment trouble and all that. What's the latest on Boko with the National Peace Council? And what do you think we can do to bring lasting peace? It's been quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, the case in Boko remains a very great issue of serious concern to us. And the Peace Council has made some inroads, traveled there, met the various factions in the conflict, you know, appeal for ceasefire to allow maybe a more amicable resolution of the matter, however long it takes, that when we are able to cease fire. But as it is, some of the reports that trickles in, target killings do happen. Now, markets are not operating, hospitals are not operating, schools, people want to go to school, they cannot go to school. And so the situation there is getting worse and worse. And it's a matter of worry. The security situation also keeps on deteriorating, and actually it creates an advantage, and especially a town which is close to the border. Just the recent information we are getting now is that the terrorists have taken over some place in Burkina Faso, and so there's an influx of displaced people, you know, across the Ghanaian border into certain northern tracts of the country. And this can really open up, because even as to want to give some asylum to people, you are not sure who is also slipping in with the arms, and then the spread of the arms around the place. And so it's a matter of serious. The Upper East National branch of the National Peace Council is working closely, and the Inter-Ethnic Peace Committee has been established to really come together, I mean, representing the various factions in the whole conflict, to come together and then through their initiatives, exchange information, cooperate, you know, with the security agencies and other peace activists in the area to ensure that we are able to really first maintain the calm, cease fire, and then educate the young people on one, negotiation, dialogue, even on matters of differences. The National Peace Council has encouraged the use of messaging, for example, on the social media, you know, hate messages, to discourage hate messages, and to use the positive side of the social media to encourage dialogue and understanding among the youth. I think that is the effort that is ongoing. The conflict seems unresolvable now, and no one has the magic wand to say that it will be resolved just today. What we need to do, to continue to do, is to continue appealing to the leaders who are in the contestation and in the conflict, to allow ceasefire, the young people to put off their arms, stop the target killings. Sometimes we hear a story, somebody's traveling, he's attacked by some people and kill them, and so on and so forth. It's not a good story to hear at all. And given the current situation in which we are, if we don't resolve it, we allow a situation of advantage to the violent extremists to take advantage, because they do take advantage of areas where there are already existing conflicts and cleavages. If we don't deal with it, then they will take advantage. And so it's a national, and I agree that Boko should not be cut off in terms of this problem as if it is the case for Boko alone. Boko is an important and integral part of the country. And when that place is destabilized and the terrorists enter, they are going to come to the down south here. And so we all have a duty. We all have a duty to do what it takes to ensure that we help bring a closure to this conflict, which has been with us for such a long time. And we must also understand that it's not easy, because a conflict that has its root deep in history and culture and tradition, it's not an easy thing to resolve immediately. So,
but we did it in Dagbon.
Yeah.
You know, so it's possible.
It's possible. So, and that's why we should not rush and think that within 1 second, within 1 week, 1 month, we're able to bring it to closure. We must draw a certain roadmap, bring in all concern on it. The first thing to do is to cease fire, make sure there is stability, and then the roadmap can be used. Probably if we want to use the Dagbon approach, maybe a committee of eminent chiefs, could be put together again, because the situation has to do with the history, tradition, and culture as regards the chieftaincy. So if you bring your maybe modern technical approach, maybe that is not what is going to solve the problem. If you make it more adversarial, it's more matters of law, maybe it's not also going to solve the problem. So because we are a society and we want to use a more close social approach to this, so that even after resolving it, we are still the same people who will live together. But if you use the more adversarial approach, okay, the law is used to resolve it, I'm not happy, but you are happy. So any little spark, brings up the pain. And I think that is what we want to deal with. So that after resolving it, social cohesion, which we need now in terms of dealing with even violent extremism, we are able to succeed.
I mean, it's a really laudable initiative by the CRS and the National Peace Council working together, and of course the Netherlands Embassy providing the financial support. But we cannot do this without focusing on the hard things. So like Stefan just said, we did a project here about 3 years ago called Porous Borders, where we focused on our border communities, and it's not a pleasant thing. It just exposes our vulnerability, and it's quite. Not to sound overly religious, I think it's quite a miracle that Ghana has been saved from violent extremism. So, for you, Sheikh, you wear many hats. You were the National Peace Council. You're still with Kodeo.
Yes.
For elections, because elections are critical times when it comes to peace maintenance and building. What should we be doing? While we work on engaging the young people, speaking to them, we always know that there will be deviants, and that's why the hard measures are there to deal with those kind of people. So what should we be doing so that your efforts are not ruined? While you do the soft work, you know that those responsible for the hard ones are also doing it. What should be our concern? Bringing into perspective the elections, the current situation with our neighboring countries, and also the concerns that, look, they're using this place as a safe haven.
Yeah, with the approach of the next election, I think that we at the Peace Council are quite aware. In anticipation, we know the next elections will be very critical. There are a lot of concerns. The political parties have started doing their internal elections, and we have seen one of the parties during the internal elections and what happened. So it gives you a certain, inkling and that what could happen. We are waiting to see the MPP internal elections to how it will go, and whatever happens will give us a foretaste of what could happen during the 2024 elections. And so it's a matter, and at the Peace Council, it has been a subject on our table. We have begun reflecting on it, and one of the things that we are hoping we will do is to really target the youth with a certain kind of democracy education, proper understanding of democracy, so that democracy is not necessarily how one gets into power in order to be able to enjoy, certain gains. We also want to really find a way to do some engagement with political parties. Really, political parties are critical to our democracy. We have no choice but to have political parties. But political parties also need to understand that you engage in policy in order to keep a country together and to render service. It's not about show of power. How do we ensure that when they are doing their campaigns, they will still be balanced in such a way that they don't use the vulnerabilities of young people to foment some of the troubles?
These are still the very important, very, very important soft measures, and I'm using soft advisedly because even though they are soft, they have tremendous impact. But I'm talking about beyond the talk. What are the real hard physical things that we must put in place? What should we be doing from the point of government in terms of ensuring that even if we have one bad nut who doesn't listen to the CRS or who doesn't listen to the National Peace Council, that person cannot get away with fomenting trouble?
Yeah, I think the important thing is, I think I will not speak for the security and so on and so forth. The important thing is that to apply the law, security must do their work, be more professional. I mean, that for me, that is the important thing. The police and the military here in this particular case is the police. They have to remain professional in doing their work. Our law system, if somebody breaches the law must be allowed to take its own course. I think we must avoid the involvement of political parties in some of these cases. But once we are professional in doing the work, allowing the institutions to work. And I think post the last election when we met at Adan, these are the issues that were raised. For example, we expect the EC to do its work as professional as possible. The judiciary, which has the duty to do some judicial things if there's any misunderstanding in our elections, do it as professional as possible. Please, that must keep the security of our electoral environment must also be as professional as possible. I'm sure, and then we also do the education, continuous education of our young people, not to allow political parties to use them for their own political gains. And I think if we can do this, we should be able to really go through the elections without too much troubles. We cannot avoid completely the trouble, but at least we should be able to keep it at bay, that we don't slide into more wider kind of violence in the country.
We are wrapping up this conversation, but Stefan, let me just find out from you. You are an entity supporting this, but what do you think should be done in terms of private sector? Everybody literally getting on board, because when there's peace, we all enjoy it, and when there's trouble, no businesses can thrive. So for you as the Netherlands Embassy doing this, your contribution can go to a certain level, but what do you want to see in terms of broader support, even if it's not financial like you're doing, but in terms of supporting the Provetsa project itself? What do you hope to see?
Well, we decided to support this project because we see they are focusing all the right things. I think we just now we've extensively discussed some of the elements of this program. I think building trust in government, restoring trust in government, and particularly in police who are at the forefront of the fight against violent extremism, is crucial for sustainable solutions. Without trust in an institution like police, it will not be a sustainable response. So we really believe in that. And we see a very important role for civil society. We've seen it elsewhere in the world in terms of anti-terrorism interventions, preventing violent extremism interventions. The role of civil society is extremely important. And we are very positive about the role the Peace Council could play. I mean, the Peace Council is a unique institution in the region, and it deserves our support, and it deserves the government's support in these responses. So we think it's very important to empower civil society, to empower Peace Council, and to empower communities. We believe in local solutions for local problems. And I think this project is definitely focusing on the right things. It's using local mechanisms for peace resolution. And we also very much believe in this two-tier approach, where not just focusing on the local level, but also on the national level, because I think it's very important. We think it's very important for the national level to understand what is happening and what the solutions should be. So for those two to be in a dialogue and to feed each other. So I think that explains why we are so supportive of this program, and we're very happy that it's going to be launched soon.
Thank you. So Lisa, I'd leave you to tell us when it will be launched and how people can be a part of this. How do we know where you are going? If you want to bring our students, our church members, if we want you to come to a community, just let us know how we can support you in whatever way.
Okay, so Provetsa will be launched this Wednesday. That's just 2 days away, on the 18th of January. We are starting at 8:30 a.m. The venue is Alisa Hotel, Northridge. And we are expecting representation from different categories. We expect representation from government ministries. In fact, our special guest of honor is the Minister of Interior, Honorable Ambrose Derry. So that shows the commitment we already have from government. We would have other ministries. National security would have representation there, every security agency in the country. We'll have some organizations. ONEP will be well represented, Cojinta. Also from the donor community, Netherlands Embassy, Stefan himself is going to be there and will actually be a panelist on a very exciting panel discussion we are planning. So it's the invitations have been sent to key people. But beyond the launch, we are going to be engaging at the regional levels as well. We'll be engaging the youth, we'll be engaging traditional authorities and religious leaders, because POVETSA is actually building upon other initiatives CRS has already done in the area of peace building. This is not the first. We have the Sahel Peace Initiative. So all the key stakeholders who are on board are also going to be supporting this launch. So our offices are open as Catholic Relief Services in Tamale and Accra. National Peace Council, their offices are open. Should anyone out there be interested in this and wants to engage at any level on any area of the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us. Our social media pages are also up and running.
And do you have any materials? You know, as you was talking and saying Catholic Relief Services, I was just thinking to myself, the Catholic Church is a very big church in Ghana. And so I'm just thinking if we had every priest, say, dedicate one Sunday to talking about peace building, or if there's anybody listening to us, a school, an organization, a mosque, anybody, do you have material available that they can also share and spread and use in teaching on peace building? And how can they get access to that?
Yes, we do. As Catholic Relief Services, we have a lot of information that's readily available. And talking about the Catholic Church, the National Catholic Secretariat, it's one... there's no Catholic Relief Services without the National Catholic Secretariat. We work closely with them. And in terms of specific materials, even for this POVETSA, we've come out with a 2-pager that we are printing a lot of copies. On the day of the launch, we'll distribute them. And when we go down to have the community and regional level engagements, we'll be giving out these resources as well, both soft and hard copies, so that people would be abreast with the nitty-gritties of the project and CRS as a whole.
Are you on social media?
Yes, we are on social media, on Facebook, CRS Ghana. You can look us up. I think we even put up something with regards to the show here this morning. Right, so we are there. You can reach out to us.
Thank you very much for joining us. Sheikh Areme Al-Shaibu, member of the governing board of the National Peace Council. He's also a spokesperson of the Chief Imam. We also had Alisa Moger, Program Manager, Youth and Peace Building Catholic Relief Services, and Stefan Hulitz, Regional Security Coordinator, West Africa, Netherlands Embassy in Ghana. We've been having a conversation this morning on peace and security. And you know, it's not just about promoting peace, it's also maintaining and reinforcing what we already have so that we don't lose grounds, even as we hope to build our peace. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, and we wish you all the best on Wednesday and for the implementation of that project. Well, that'll be it by way of our show today, but we will just let you in on our Drive Safe tip with Benjamin Akakpo. After that, News Desk is up next.
Welcome again on Drive Safe with me, Benjamin Akakpo. Always a pleasure coming your way. We're all trying to stay alive on the roads as we drive or, walk across the roads. And, as we do all of these things, we want to keep ourselves alive and other people alive too. It is crucial. In these days when the accidents are just happening and lives are being lost. You remember that incident where there was a crash and people were burnt beyond recognition. We don't want that to keep happening. That's why we have Drive Safe. Thank you for joining us once more. Cecil Gabra, CEO of Top Tech Transport and Logistics, is our guest once more. But before I get to him, here is today's quiz question. Do you know what this road sign means? Okie doke. At the end of the segment, you'll find out what it means and whether you got the answer correct. But right now, howdy, Cecil.
Very well. And yourself?
I'm well. I'm well.
We are back again.
We're back again. We started talking about distractions and we went heavy on mobile phones. Today, I'd like us to look at 4 crucial things. 1, driving with only one hand, left or right. Driving with children below a certain age, let's say 5 or 12, and what the implications are. Eating and drinking while driving, and we've all done that at some point. And also loud music. Now there's something interesting there about the loud music. We'll get to it, but over to you. More distractions, why should we avoid these?
Well, you know, earlier on I spoke to you about wearing your coat whilst you are driving. And the coat that I'm talking about is not the coat that you are wearing. It is the driver's coat, which is COAT.
Right.
Concentration, observation, alertness, and tolerance. This is what you need as a defensive driver. You need to concentrate all the time, and that is why it is the first C. And because you need concentration to drive, you must avoid distractions. And then you realize why I always stress distractions.
And just to chip in on the bit of concentration, that is even why my mind goes back to something you've said before. And I was sharing with someone a short while ago. When you're driving and you see someone swerve all of a sudden and do something, you probably might want to follow because you don't know why the person did that. The driver ahead of you, of course, because there may be something the person nearly ran into. So you always have to be cautious. Concentration.
Very, very true. So concentration. And then not always, and that is why you need to give yourself a gap to see what the driver is really doing.
What the cause is.
Okay.
Right.
So it's always good to put up your thinking caps.
It happened to me recently.
Yeah.
So a truck, its axle bar fell.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
Wow.
And they had slowed down. So the axle bar fell, then they slowed down a bit ahead, and the driver ahead of me had to, quickly. So I noticed as well, but the axle bar was rolling into my lane anyway. So one of my tires went over it, but at least it wouldn't have been if I had gone with a direct hit. So that's why, again, concentration is crucial.
And that is why when you are driving, your following distance must be
right.
Yes, must be right. You don't follow vehicles so closely. Nope. We always say when you are following a vehicle, make sure that you see the red ties.
Right.
But that is not even enough. I have adapted this, that when I'm on the motorway and you're driving at 100 kilometers per hour, I'll leave a 100-meter gap because I don't know what will happen.
Right.
If somebody is driving in front of me and is driving at 50 kilometers per hour, I look at it 50 kilometers per hour, at least I'll give that gap 50. It works a lot. Try it and see. 10 kilometers, 10 meters, 20 kilometers, 20 meters, and that is the trick, so that you not find yourself wanting when an axle drops again. Eating and driving.
But I had given this person quite some distance, but this was dawn driving. So
okay, I can understand you. And then your lights, remember we said it before, must see up to 40 meters.
Right.
Okay, that's your dim light. Your high lights must see 100 meters. If it's not adjustable, just go to DVLA office, and I think you pay about 30 cedis, 35 cedis for them to readjust it. So that's a tip for today before we talk about the main issue.
Thanks for that one.
Which is eating and driving. Eating and driving is not any good thing. Distractions.
Right.
Right.
Including drinking, right?
Yes, including drinking. Let me explain eating to you. Assuming you've bought yourself a big burger, okay, and then you grab it, you are eating. Once your hand even goes here, the law is saying that all your 2 hands must be on the steering wheel, okay, practically.
Right.
So you grab your beef burger, you take a good bite, you look at it, distractions, okay. What happens at that particular time is that few seconds can get you crushed, right? What if your beef in the burger falls down? You're going to struggle to look for it.
Beef not a form.
Yes, you struggle, and it's gone beyond your seat. I mean, that's the side space that you have. Your hands will go there. Look at me. Your head, your hands, your head, hands. Bam, you've had it. Water. You are driving. You want to take in water, okay? you're looking for, you know where water is. You've opened it with your 2 hands. I mean, look at it. Sometimes 1 hand. Okay, you've already flouted your own regulations of the 2 hands on the wheels.
Unless you're doing that at a red light.
Yes, that is fine for you, but I wouldn't do that. I would rather prefer to stop and drink the water. Because if you are drinking the water, you know where you rather enjoy the water. When it gets to the last drop, your head goes up like this. Before it comes down, bam, you've hit somebody on the rear. So there are little things that we do that causes such accidents. Oh, the carnabo BHE. What is the problem, right? You go and look at it, and then he was either eating or he was drinking water. So we need to change our lives.
Okay.
If you want to eat, you don't eat in the car. We have a lot of company regulations that if you eat in the car, definitely a little bit of it will fall. And guess what? Cockroaches will also have that opportunity to live with you. As you're driving and then you have a cockroach crossing your windscreen, oh my goodness. That is even much more dangerous than anybody who has crossed you. So distractions. Make sure you don't eat in the car. Make sure you don't drink whilst you are driving. You can park, do it and take off. It spoils nothing.
Right.
So that's the tip.
Okay. So drinking and driving, eating and driving, they don't mix.
No.
Let's look at driving with 1 hand.
Yes.
And it's something that strangely, or maybe not so strangely, a lot of people adapt to. Once they get in, these may even be right-handed people, but they become used to using their left to drive. And they drive with 1 hand, and they're very comfortable. But there's something to do with that, right? There's a problem.
Let me go back to what happened to you where you had to swerve an axle.
Axle
okay.
bar,
You can't you can't do that with 1 hand. You can't do that with 1 hand. And then once you are driving with 1 hand, you should know that you don't have that steering control. In case of any tire burst, you have an accident. In case you fall into a ditch, the steering is going to go left and right, and you could have an accident. But if you have your 2 hands, and that is why you refer to the LI 2180, it tells you specifically that if you're driving, hold your steering wheel with your 2 hands. It's an offense to drive with 1 hand. It is even an offense that you hold your steering with 1 hand and then you even bend.
Ultra 7 crack.
Yes, that's what my very good friends
music.
Yes, 7. Ultra 7, it's an offense because you're still using 1 hand. Use your 2 hands, have a firmer grip that in case of any accident, you will have the fullest control of your vehicle. That is it. I see a lot of people driving with 1 hand and then it bothers me. If you are tired, the trick is that let your hands be on your lap, but you still have the firmest grip. And you can change and come to 10 to 12.
Right.
Okay, that is what we teach a lot of people. Once you are going straight, you can use 10 to 12 or 9 to 3, which is the middle. Or if you are very, very tired, you can go down.
Right. Hold the steering at the bottom. But you still have a grip on it.
Yes, but not 1 hand. Try as much as possible to use 2 hands to drive.
Okay.
And then others will even put their hands on the gear.
Right.
If you put your hands on the gear...
Because they have their feet on the brakes, so they feel...
You put your hands on the gear lever, there's one thing which is happening. You are causing harm to your transmission system. Are you getting that? Right. We'll go into the technical aspect of it and then you see.
But what exactly happens there?
When you put your hands on the gear lever, right, what happens is that you exert some weight and it affects the gears. And the gears will be biting each other. You'll never know. It will take some maybe months and then they will tell you that, oh, Jack, your gearbox is gone. So change, if it's a manual car, change the gear, remove your hands from the gear, and then remove your legs from the clutch. People are driving and then their legs are on the clutch if it's a manual car. Okay, that is also a big issue. You are disturbing the pressure plate, you are disturbing the whole clutch disc, and very soon you go to the workshop. So we are back with distractions.
Wow. 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 Well, Cecil, that is really interesting, these bits you're sharing with us. And of course, today we've been talking about eating and drinking while driving, and also driving with one hand. Now, did you know all of that? Sometimes we do it unconsciously, but it could result in your death or at least injury. And you don't want that. Not for yourself, not for family, not for whoever may be in your car, and definitely not for other road users. We all ought to be much more cautious. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two that you can, as we say, put in your knee and apply while you drive. As we wrap, here is the answer to today's quiz question. So you think you know? Do you know? Okay, it's a wrap on Drive Safe with me, Benjamin Akakpo. It gets more and more interesting. Next time we meet, we'll be doing part 3 of distractions while driving. Catch that one, don't miss it. Have a good day.